Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Bakari Lumumba back once again, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. If you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. This is once again a dual stream, a dual broadcast with Beequine Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire. And of course, yours truly, Bakari Lumumba, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com. Black Empowerment Initiative, where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. I think we have a rather evocative topic for this evening, one I've been waiting for. I've reached out to a number of individuals, different organizations, and my hope, my desire is that they'll be to come on and we have a great conversation. But the conversation we're going to have this evening, family, is queer Pan-Africanism Pan-Africanism? Right? You heard me correctly. Is queer Pan-Africanism Pan-Africanism? So we're going to deconstruct what queer Pan-Africanism is. Um, we're going to tap in, as you all know, I've done some shows with some other brothers, particularly Search for Uhuru, Brother Dynasty Mir, and we had a conversation about what Pan-Africanism is. So I don't think we need to rehash that conversation. But in my opinion, there have been a number of individuals, entities that seek to oftentimes promote their own ideas or agenda in the name of Black radical politics. So we may get into that a little bit later. You see, Richard, the African elder, says, as long as the homosexual can be African first, they could be Pan-Africanist, but there's no queer Africa, period. So definitely gonna need you to tap in, Rich, the African elder. The link, of course, is in the chat. The link is in the chat. And this, once again, this is a situation where I'm looking to push this. I'm just asking the question. Brother Mufasa, I did a show last week. He brought this up. I had never heard of it. So I said, you know what we're going to do is I'm going to do a little research, do some reading, and then we're going to tap in and actually be part of the conversation. I have this conversation. So, because I literally thought he was making up, making this up. So definitely want you all to tap in. But the link is in the description. And I'll put the link in the chat momentarily after we go through, of course, the ground rules here at Lumumba Speaks regarding this broadcast. Brother Hemotep Uhuru Hiru says peace and blessings. No, no, no. Okay, so you're giving us a destiny shout already. No, 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 no. Absolutely. Understand where you're coming from there. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go over the ground rules and then we're gonna open things up, family. So very quickly, as you all know, here at Lumumba Speaks, we accept diversity of thought. So we don't care if you're on the right, you're on the left, you're right down the middle. Diversity of thought is welcome. I believe that one of the ways to have a great conversation and to learn is to not operate in the echo chamber, right? So I think having opening yourself up to different critiques, criticisms, viewpoints can actually help you grow, not only in terms of your intellect, but also as a person. More so, it can help you view and learn of, be aware of blind spots in your perspective, ideology, or values or beliefs. So something to consider there. Number two, no racial epithets of any kind, no epithets of any kind. We may have some brothers and sisters from the LGBTQ community who are going to tap in this evening to be part of the conversation. So we want to make sure that there are no epithets used whatsoever. As you all know here at Lumumba Speaks, we are a site of Black empowerment, and we believe in the three N's of Black power, self-respect, self-defense, and of course, self-determination. So before we do anything, we want to make sure that we respect ourselves as African people. Number three, I'm sorry, no facts over feelings, family. So facts over feelings, that means if someone is making an argument that you disagree with, attack the argument, not the person. Attack the argument, not the person. Attack the argument, not the person. And we do not want to engage in ad hominem attacks, right? So attack the argument, not the person. And last but not least, no fundamentally false statements. So you can have whatever view or perspective that you want. However, if you were to make a claim that was patently false, such as LeBron James is the GOAT because Michael Jordan only won 2 championships, that would be a fundamentally false statement. And then, of course, I will tap in. And then, of course, we would have to break down why that statement is fundamentally false. So, want to make sure that we understand that there. Last but not least, our mission here at Lumumba Speaks is neither to exonerate or vilify, but to challenge conventional wisdom and re-examine what has been previously accepted as fact. Right. So, once again, we don't want to exonerate or vilify. We're simply challenging conventional wisdom and re-examining what has previously been accepted as fact. And today's Black History Fact is a rather somber one. As 56 years ago on this day, we're talking about April 9th, 1968, Dr. King's funeral was held. We know he was assassinated by a sniper's bullet on April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. There was a public service held at Morehouse College in the AU in Atlanta. Then there was a private service held for the family and close friends of Dr. King at Ebenezer Baptist Church. So 56 years ago today, family, Dr. King's funeral was held. Public service once again at Morehouse College, and then a private service held at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. So I want to make sure you all are aware of that. So we're going to tap into the topic for this evening. Of course, it's queer Pan-Africanism, Pan-Africanism. Um, Sister Sada Muhammad, appreciate you, sister. Hopefully you could tap in and be part of the conversation. So reason why we're having this conversation, homosexuality, as many of us know, continues to be a hotly debated social and political issue, particularly on the African continent, but even in African communities here in the Western world. The reason for this has been that a number of African nations have passed laws which criminalize homosexuality. A most recent example of this has been in Ghana, which passed an anti-homosexuality bill earlier this year. So we're going to really unpack all of this, right? First and foremost, as a Pan-Africanist, I would say that my position is very clear. We do not oppress our own. We do not oppress our own. We do not oppress our own. But one of the arguments that's made from a queer African perspective, queer African people make, is that gender binaries were created and brought to Africa by colonizers. I'll say that one more time. The argument that's made, because I read some literature over the weekend, is that gender binaries were created by colonizers and that African societies were gender fluid. Okay, so that's something that we're going to tap into. Some of the literature that individuals have read, or even what referred to, I don't know if they actually read the literature, is male daughters, female husbands, gender and sex in African society, and boy wives and female husbands, studies in African homosexuality, right? So, and one of the arguments that they make is that this concept of gender binaries is a Western concept, right? However, many will push back and say, well, right, the concept of being queer is a Western concept, right? So there's a lot to unpack there, right? And then many argue that Western nations are seeking to bully African nations into accepting LGBTQ-friendly political systems, and the reason is, of course, population control. So these are some of the issues on each side of the aisle that people are seeking to unpack, and of course, they're wrestling with. So, family, I'm gonna put the link in the chat. I want you all to tap in, be part of the conversation. Let me know your thoughts regarding, is queer Pan-Africanism Pan-Africanism? Okay. So once again, the link is in the chat, family. I want you all to tap in, be part of the conversation. The question is queer Pan-Africanism Pan-Africanism? In terms of and I would give this, in terms of some of the literature that I've read, I think one of the issues I would have with queer Pan-Africanism is, from a Pan-African standpoint, what your African identity is your most salient identity. It's what comes first. Those are the interests that you put first. However, I would argue, and from what I've read, and of course it's just a weekend worth of reading, that from a queer Pan-African standpoint, the goal is to make one's sexual orientation and gender identity and expression the most salient identity. So I think that is where you would have a point of we would be at an impasse there. So definitely want some people to tap in, be part of the conversation. Rich, the African elder, says, we must remember what ancestor Bobby Wright said. You can't examine African phenomenon with European methodologies. The constructs of gender from the European perspective is antithetical to Africa. I would agree 100%, brother. I would agree. I think this is maybe what's taking place here. But the other issue, when you talk about this concept of there not being gender, a lack of gender binaries, traditional African culture being gender fluid. By traditional African culture, we mean African culture independent of European or Arab descent. Independent of European or Arab influence. I'm sorry, I said descent. But gender binaries exist in Africa long before colonialism, right? In voodoo, the creator deity is half man, half woman, right? This was representative of. So, Richard, I need you to turn your camera on in queue so I can make sure you're not trolling. Then I can bring you into the live. So, just need you to cam up in queue, and then you can come into the live. So, Richard Sheffield needs you to cam up in queue, then I could bring you into the live. The significance of this is that men and women cannot exist without each other. So, right, so some people argue that deity was an example of maybe a queer identity, but that's not the case. This is obviously a very, very binary view of gender in terms of the significance that men and women cannot exist without each other. One finds other examples in African culture. The Lingala people Okay, I got you, brother. You can turn your camera off and I'll bring you in. Then in Lingala language, there's a phrase for right side, which means on the hand of man, and a phrase for left side, which is on the hand of woman. This again is a very binary view of gender. Shout out to brother Dwayne Omawale for providing me with this information. He actually wrote an article on it on Medium. Um, right. So then we even see in the Dogon people, there was a belief that everyone was born male or female. So and the Dogon also believed that circumcision rituals removed the second soul, so that man were left with a male soul, women were left with a woman's soul. This again is a very binary view of gender. As we found what gendered rites of passage in traditional African culture, right? So men went through a rite of passage, women through a rite of passage to prepare them for what? Being a man and a woman in that particular African society. So the idea and concept that African people, that there was a gender fluidity is ahistorical. And then many would argue if someone is seeking to what falsify African history, how can they then be a friend or ally of African people or advocate for African people? So those are just things to consider. Brother Richard, what say you?
Okay. Do I do anything with the camera?
Oh no, you can keep your camera off. You can keep the camera
off. Baragani, brother and family, glad to be here. You know, I want to start off with what our great ancestor, Dr. Bobby E. Wright said. You know, he said you cannot examine African phenomenon using European methodologies. We have to understand that this whole construct of queer and binary and all this and such is purely a European idea. You know, it is antithetical to the historical Africana experience. It's inconsistent with any group of people, any nation at any time. However, homosexuality did exist, but the whole concept of queerism is something rather recent, and we have to be able to separate. And as our brother said, we have to love our brothers and sisters who identify as being gay, because gay people have always been strong in the freedom struggle, always from very, very beginning. But the queer agenda is something altogether different. So I just hope that we can understand that we have to establish, as we take on this conversation, we must establish African definitions. And we have to understand that we're going to have to make conclusions as Africans and not as black-faced Europeans. Thank you.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this question, brother. Let me ask. Okay, so he's tapped out. I thought you were going to stay in, brother. You could have stayed on and been part of the conversation. Because the question I was going to ask you is queer Pan-Africanism Pan-Africanism? But everyone, if you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and the like button. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Make sure you hit the notification bell as well. We're asking the question, is queer Pan-Africanism Pan-Africanism? So I want you all to tap in, be part of the conversation. Rich, the African elder, if you can tap back in, be part of the conversation. Okay, there we go. Absolutely. Gotcha.
Yes,
yeah, so is queer Pan-Africanism Pan-Africanism?
No, because if we understand, we had our great brother, James Sedanison, he talked about the social dominance theory. And
I'm familiar with social dominance theory.
Right. And so we know that this whole idea of queerism and all that, it all falls under the hegemonic plan of the West. And it's an ideology of divide and conquer. Because when we get to the root of it, when you talked about the male and female soul of the Dogon, and not only the Dogon, but we know that even in the Kemetic culture, you're born male, female. We know that's true in the Zulu culture also. All right, we know, but it's not, you know, they stay body bound, land bound, and so I think that what takes queer Pan-Africanism out of the conversation is its principles and definitions are just inconsistent with anything that ultimately leads to a Pan-African reality. Now, some may disagree, but I want to say this, though. I want to say this. for the sake of for the sake of freedom, we need everybody.
I would
We
agree with
shouldn't
that.
throw anybody, nobody aside.
I would agree with that. So when you say your Pan-African reality, what do you mean by that? What does that look like to you?
Pan-African reality is a full existential of reality. It is first of all, the African, we don't break our lives up into spiritual, economic, social. We have a concept called Ubuntu, which
Mm-hmm.
you are complete all in one. And in order to be complete all in one, that's not just complete with social mores, but that's also complete with a vision for the future, a respect for tradition and ritual, um, a respect for the ancestors, and a move forward. Now, I don't think because the whole idea of calling women cis, putting prefixes on a natural woman, and recreating these identities is crazy. Brother, what gets me is I have African people who will argue me down about cis this and binary that, but then when I say that there's a common African ethos, oh no, there's no continuity there. There's always some kind of reason to just denounce it. But we can imagine the most heretical, crazy
So,
ideas.
let me ask you this: because this is something I've argued, but I want to get your perspectives. Appreciate you tapping in, particularly with you being an elder. Would you argue that one of the reasons why people embrace this idea is because it's a way to be progressive in a manner that is socially accepted by the ruling class?
Yeah, but our people are embracing it. What they're embracing and what the actual queer agenda stands for are two different things. I
Okay.
support my brothers and sisters having the right to walk out in freedom and not be beat up on and love
Right.
who they
Or
want.
criminalize,
Yeah, yeah,
discriminate
I
against,
got all,
essentially.
I'm with all that 100%. I
Mhm.
mean, when we grew up, I don't know about you, but when I grew up in the late 60s as a kid, in the 70s. I was born 1960. And, when I first saw a homosexual, they scared me. I didn't know what they were. You know what I mean? But they were always there. And we learned about it. I mean, like they were always there. They always had their lifestyle. Now, to be more socially acceptable is a good thing, but the LGBTQ agenda is a whole nother agenda. And when you look at what it's doing to black men and black women specifically, I'm going to give you one example.
Okay.
In 1990, it was 1990 or 1989, my wife and I wanted to adopt children. She couldn't have children. We tried and tried, couldn't have them. So we had an adoption lady come in. We was in Delaware. And this lady, she went through the thing, told us, the how to's and what fors. And she said, she said, Mr. and Mrs. Sheffield, I got to be honest with you. This is what she said to us. She said, two gay white men have a better chance of adopting a black child than y'all do. And that was a big thing back in the 90s. Everybody kind of knew about it, then it went under. But it's still true today. There's so many, there's these individual colonizers adopting, having their own personal colonized homes, with black children. Where it's hard. A black man and woman can become a foster parent, but adoption is a hard,
And
hard
this is something
thing.
that we have seen, particularly with your white celebrities going to the continent, adopting black children, and then raising them as the opposite gender.
Yeah, that Therazon woman,
Yes.
yeah, in
Right.
particular. And
So,
then you
we've
got
seen this with
Dwayne
different
Wade.
numbers with that. Yeah.
So, but then again, we have to. I think as Africans, we have to, like you said, we don't turn back our own. We have a responsibility in our getting of freedom and healing, because we have to not only heal and educate, but we have to simultaneously do three things. We have to heal, educate, and fight. And
Right.
we have to do all three at the same level of intensity. And we have to have a place for our brothers and sisters who are consider themselves gay. You
Right.
know what I mean? They need to have a voice and a place. But we have to ask them, why do you need a queer Pan-Africanism if we really understand and if we really define what Pan-Africanism is? Or can you just fit? Can you just be Pan-African as you are queer? As a person may be Pan-African and may call themselves Christian. A person may be
Right, and
Pan-African
that's the point. That's
and
the point I was
indigenous.
making. That we have people of different walks of life who are Pan-Africanists, right? And we know as a Pan-Africanist is African family first. Your African identity is your most salient identity. Nothing comes before that. Unfortunately, what we're seeing here is that, and I even read some of the literature, they're arguing for queer to come before Pan-Africanism, and
Yeah,
that is
that's the agenda.
antithetical to the concept and idea of Pan-Africanism, because now they're seeking to make one's sexual orientation and gender identity or expression more salient than one's African identity.
Right. And so now where's the unity in that? I mean, we have to understand when we have this conversation with our brothers and sisters that we have to understand that our brother or our sister is not our adversary. We're a principle-based people. And as you said about the ad hominem attacks, we have to discuss principles.
Mm-hmm.
We need to debate the principles, and we need to know, we need to make it clear what Urugu is, what this hegemonic threat is, what the social dominance theory, how it plays itself out in our everyday lives. We need to understand that. And this way we can have a more intelligent conversation. That's why we have to educate, heal, and fight all at the same time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, peace, family. If you're watching, once again, this is a dual stream between Bequaline Network, the Pan-African social media extraordinaire, and of course, Lumumba Speaks, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. Having a rather evocative and provocative conversation this evening, asking the question, is queer Pan-Africanism Pan-Africanism? Definitely want you all to tap in. If you're watching, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell for future videos. So Brother Sharif says there is absolutely no queer, LGBTQ in Pan-Africanism. The Pan-African agenda is absolutely African family first, men, women, and children. So Brother Sharif, want you to tap in, be part of the conversation. The link is in the chat, brother. The link is in the description. Really want you to tap in. Let's unpack what you have to say. Are you making the argument that brothers and sisters who do practice a non-traditional lifestyle are not allowed to be in a Pan-African organization? Want to hear what you have to say there. John Jackson says, the Black family is the embryo of a Black nation, Dr. John Henry Clark. Absolutely. So one of the arguments, and let me bring this up, I'm going to pull this up because I actually read some literature. One of the arguments that I read on an article on queer Pan-Africanism, the argument was the term Pan-Africanism just on its own, I can't relate to it because I can't relate to a straight Black man. So I think, so let me just read the whole thing and then we could go through it. Well, give me 1 second, family. I can, however, relate to queer Pan-Africanism's ideas that say as a Black queer body, there was a commonality between queer Africans. They say if you're putting queer before Pan-Africanism, then it becomes more intersectional because then we're speaking to identity, gender, sex, as well as all the constructs that govern those things. In Moo's mind, Pan-Africanist thought and action can't be written in stone. And that, like queer identities, it has to constantly adapt to the changing social climate and needs of the people and communities it purports to serve. All the people, however, in their experience, older generations tend to have a fixed idea of what is and isn't African, and therefore the priorities of the Pan-African movement, which has been criticized for at best playing lip service to the specific needs of queer Africans, needs to be critiqued and, of course, updated. So I think one of the things we have to look at here is the concept and idea that Pan-Africanism is about relating to straight Black men. We also understand that there were straight Black women who were Pan-Africanists. Amy Ashford Garvey, Mary Church Terrell, Yah Santara, Queen Mother Moore, Queen Nanny and the Maroons, so on and so forth. The beat goes on. So I think that in itself is a disingenuous argument. But once again, I think the issue here, and of course, we're not advocating for the criminalization, dehumanization, or discrimination of brothers and sisters who are LGBTQ. But what we're seeing here is that there's a push to move from focusing on what Pan-Africanism's goal of what self-determination, right, the right to live a life unencumbered of foreign domination, right, an embrace of one's cultural heritage, racial pride, to focusing on an intersectional approach. I can understand that many would argue maybe that's old-fashioned. However, those goals still haven't been met to this day, right? And so there's a focus and push somewhere else. And so one of the questions we have, excuse me, and I actually agree with the elder when he says we need all hands on deck. But one of the issues that we have is the focus and goals. Typically, when I've been in community with those individuals, they come to an organization, isn't on Pan-Africanist goals, is on LGBTQ goals. So that's something we can unpack as well. Let's see, Gentle Killer ain't no Pan-African. So listen, Gentle Killer, I understand your position, but we're not going to use ad hominem. So we'll have an intelligent conversation this evening. You could tap in, be part of the conversation, or you could speak in the chat. But we want to have an intelligent conversation. No ad hominems, no epithets of any kind. So we're not going to use that type of language here on the show. We want to have a respectful conversation. I actually put a flyer out to some brothers and sisters in that community, in the LGBTQ community, queer community. Hopefully they can tap in and be part of the conversation. But once again, this is something I think we need to unpack. Shout out to Brother Shabazz, Brother Mufasa, for even making me aware that there was a concept, an idea known as Queer Pan-Africanism, because I had never heard of it before, and I actually told him he was making something up, but that wasn't the case whatsoever. So once again, if you're watching, family, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button, as well as the notification bell. You're watching Equaline Network, the Pan-African social media extraordinaire, and Lumumba Speaks, Black Empowerment Initiative, where we believe we can gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. Tap in. The link is in the chat. The link is in the description. I want to hear what you all have to say. Hopefully, we can get some brothers and sisters from the community to tap in and be part of the conversation. But I think one of the major issues is that there's a shift towards an intersectional approach to activism rather than a Pan-African approach, which was seeking to promote the political, social, and economic empowerment and liberation of African people from foreign domination and advocacy for self-governance, right, or the right to self-determination. And so that is a conversation to have, because I would argue one may be incongruent with the other, right? I would even argue it actually is, right? You just want to make it plain because the focus is not the same. So tap in, family. The link is in the chat. The link is in the description. Once again, looking for some brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ community to tap in, the queer community to tap in and be part of this conversation regarding is queer Pan-Africanism. Keyword is queer Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism. Once again, brother Mufasa was the one who put me on game to this concept, so I did some reading over the weekend to prep for tonight's show. Also, want to give a shout out to everyone. I'm quite sure everyone enjoyed the solar eclipse. If you're here in the northern or the Western Hemisphere in North America, I'm quite sure you all enjoyed that. Great experience. It came through Columbus, Ohio, 3:12 p.m. We reached totality, as they said it on NASA. But great experience. I'm glad I got to experience that. But once again, family, tap in. The link is in the chat. The link is in the description. We're seeking to have a conversation regarding is queer Pan-Africanism. Is queer Pan-Africanism Pan-Africanism? Also, you can use a pseudonym, right? And you can cam up. So if you feel that maybe your perspective, your position is problematic, right? It may not be accepted by many. Then this is something, of course, that we can unpack. So let's see here. Peace and blessings, fam. Just like the interracial dating merit sing softly genocides our race, so too does the promotion of unconventional non-reproductive relationships. Understood. Tap in, be part of the conversation. I want to hear what you have to say further regarding that issue. As I stated before at the beginning of the show, some have argued that Western nations are pushing this, really trying to bully African nations to accept a LGBTQ-friendly agenda government because they're seeking to engage in some form of population control. The other issue is that African culture traditionally, although it viewed homosexuality as something that was as a pejorative behavior, but it was very what's the word I want to use? Tolerant in terms of individuals that engage in that behavior were not criminalized, discriminated against, or assaulted, right? Victims of assault. So tap in, be part of the conversation. You're watching a dual stream between Equaline Network, the Pan-African social media extraordinaire, and of course, Lumumba Speaks, a Black Empowerment Initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always, keyword always, betting on Black. So I want to hear what you all have to say. Once again, you can cam up, you can use a pseudonym if you want to tap in, be part of the conversation, and maintain your anonymity. I understand many people would say, hey, this is a controversial topic. I don't want people to think that I'm homophobic or transphobic. Completely understandable. That's why we're going to make sure that all the language that we use is English this evening is above board, right? It's going to be above board. We're not going to allow for any untoward behavior of any kind or language of any kind. That's just a norm here on my platform anyway. Like I said before, we do not engage in pseudonyms. We do not engage in ad hominem attacks. I don't allow epithets of any kind on my channel, racial, gender, sexual, of any kind whatsoever. We believe in Black empowerment, and the 3 N's of Black power are self-respect, self-discipline, and of course, self-determination. So once again, family, I want you all to tap in, be part of the conversation. You can use the pseudonym. IBFA want you to tap in, share what you have to say. Alexis Paula, Rich the African Elder, you could come back. Sister Asada, good evening. Hopefully you could tap in as well, sister, give your perspective. Love to hear what you have to say. Emotep, want to hear from you as well, brother. And of course, brother Sharif, right? You're a frequent commenter, but you've never tapped in. At least I don't recall. So tap in, be part of the conversation. All right. Tap in and be part of the conversation. I would appreciate you as well. Do you think denying Black LGBTQ people contradicts the idea of Pan-Africanism? So I want you to tap in, Alexis. Tap in. The link is in the chat. The link's in the description. And I want you to share with me what do you mean by denying? When you say denying Black LGBTQ people, and if it contradicts, I want to know what that means. And Brother Rich, the African Elder, has even stated, tap in, sis, tap in. So you're being goaded to come on the show. Once again, you do not have to cam up, sister, and you can use a pseudonym. So, but I want to, what do you mean by denying, right? When you say denying, what do you mean by that? You're talking about denying their humanity, not, right? So I need to know what you mean by that. Are you talking about denying their humanity, not acknowledging their gender identity or expression? Want to know, what do you mean by that when you say denying? So tap in. The link is in the chat. The link is in the description. Tap in and be part of the conversation as we discuss this queer Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism. Matter of fact, put a 1 in the chat if you've heard of the concept queer Pan-Africanism before today. If you've heard of the concept queer Pan-Africanism before today, put a 1 in the chat. If you hadn't heard of the concept, put a 2 in the chat. So once again, if you heard of the concept or heard of the term queer Pan-Africanism, put a 1 in the chat, family. If you had not heard of the concept queer Pan-Africanism, put a 2 in the chat. So do that. And Sister Paula. Well, hold on, sister. Well, sister, okay. Well, don't worry about being shy. Once again, you do not have to cam up. You do not have to cam up, particularly having a person, right, tap in leads to other people tapping in. So once again, sister, you do not have to cam up, and you can use a pseudonym. But I really want to unpack what you mean in the question that you asked. And the best way to do that, of course, is to do what? Have this conversation. Sister Marie, you can turn your camera on and cue. Just make sure you're not trolling, then I will bring you into the live. So if you could turn your camera on and cue, then we will bring you into the live, Sister Marie. Once again, okay. So Brother Sharif says no, he's never heard the term. Sister Paula said yes. Brother Josiah said yeah, no. Brother Haru, no. Brother Rich, okay. So pretty split, pretty even. So Sister Marie, once again, you can turn your camera on in the queue. We greatly appreciate it. Just want to make sure you're not trolling. Then we will bring you into the live. Just want to make sure you're not trolling. Unfortunately, we've had a number of individuals come on the show trolling. So we just want to prevent anything like that happening. We don't want to get a strike from, of course, YouTube if someone seeks to post some inappropriate content, right? So once again, if you could do that, sister, we greatly appreciate it. And then we'll bring you into the live. But I just need you to turn your camera on in the queue. Sister said, okay, sounds good. Give me a couple minutes and I'll be on the show. Appreciate your sister, absolutely. So once again, family, if you're watching, make sure you hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you hit the notification bell. Also, if you can, be a blessing to the show. Help us out on Cash App, $ Lumumba Speaks. We want to make sure that you could be a blessing to the show. So Sister Marie, okay, got you. Okay, got you. Okay, all right, I got you. All right, got you ready to tap in. So she says, I thought Pan-Africanism included standing in solidarity with all Africans. How are you Pan-Africanists, but don't stand in solidarity with certain Africans because they are part of the LGBTQ community? That is a great question. That's why I want you to tap in and be part of the show. Sister Marie, how are you doing, sister? Sister, I like to say sister. What's the word?
I'm doing well. How are you?
You know what? I'm doing just fine.
So yeah, I was having a conversation with some students earlier about this and feeling othered in the community
Mm-hmm.
and feeling in a lot of ways that their identity with the queer community has um, disconnected them from other parts of Pan-African Black community. I work on a college campus, so a lot of them feel as though they walk in the room and other Black students who are in supposed organizations that are supposed to like BSUs and things
Mm-hmm.
like that, that they shun them
Mm.
because of their queerness. Um, Oftentimes without even knowing them. So I'll just say that. Step back.
Okay, feeling other. I think this is a good conversation. So, and I think that ties in what Sister Paula said. Well, how can you be a Pan Africanist and you're not standing in solidarity, or you're othering Black people because of their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression? Right. So I think this is a great conversation to have. Um, Rich, the African elder, if you could tap back in, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this issue as well. This is something I, of course, have seen. I remember I had a student once share with me that one of the issues they had with the Black Student Union was that it was, um, let's make sure I get the term correctly, heteronormative. Heteronormative was the term that the student used, and that as a result, they felt unwelcome or out of place in that space. And so then the question becomes, uh, are we, let me see how can I put this, are we changing who we are or the culture, right? In terms, if we then start to say, okay, well, is our culture not heteronormative? Is our culture queer? So that's something to consider. See what John Jackson says, why are we Black people so obsessed with LGBTQ now? What are we doing to support Pan-Africanism? Did we get a modicum of independence and neo-imperialism and forget that we still have issues to resolve? So, but Jackson, I think that's a good point. Great question that you were asking. Tap in, be part of the conversation. The link is in the chat. Link is in the description. And let's just really open this up and have this conversation, right? But I think one of the major issues is being is heteronormativity problematic? That's the question I'm going to pose to the community out there in the chat. Some of you all are going to be tapping in. And then of course the Sister Maria. So is heteronormativity problematic? Is it, or is it antithetical to the idea and concept of Pan-Africanism? So that's the question that I'm asking. Any thoughts? Any thoughts? Okay, I guess.
Well, I mean, I believe that when we binary and we are only focused, then we are leaving people out of our community. They are Black people, right?
Mhm.
These are people who they are our people,
Mhm.
and so if we're looking at it in a gender perspective, then we are leaving some folks behind.
Okay.
And so a heteronormative way of thinking has to other someone else.
Well, some would argue, because I actually did some reading this weekend. Some would argue that a homonormative way of thinking others people as well. And in fact, I've read some literature arguing that heterosexuality is um, oppressive, and that homosexuality is the opposite of that, is antithetical to being oppressive. And so the argument is that people who practice what are considered traditional sexual lifestyles are problematic, inherently problematic. So, like I said, we talk about each perspective. I think individuals are being othered based on what I've read. But Sister Paula, waiting for you to tap in, check in. Brother Jackson, want you to do the same. Rich, the African Elder, want you to tap in as well. If you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and the like button, right? But so let me ask you this question, Marie. because I've read a lot of literature on this issue, and one of the arguments made was that uh, the concept of gender binaries were brought in by the colonizers, right? However, that is something that is ahistorical, right? So the question many would have is, we bring people into the movement, right? The ideology and the movement, but they're falsifying African history. Can you be an advocate for your community when you're seeking to what? Falsify one's history.
That's a good question. I would say no. I
Hmm.
mean, well,
I mean, because here's the thing: some would argue that that's okay. I'm gonna let you ask the question. I'm gonna let you ask
no,
the
no, no,
question.
no. I want to hear your here's the thing.
No, because some people would argue, okay, then that in itself is othering, and then you say, then people would say, well, that's your perspective of history, right? I mean, so I just think there's a rabbit hole you could go down, right, to where any type of standards could be considered oppressive. So, for example, most Pan-Africanist organizations, one standard is that you can engage in criminal activity. Some would argue that that's oppressive to people who are what? Engaging in criminal activity because they have to find a way to what? Make a living. Even though we know oftentimes being engaged in a criminal activity, whether it be serious crimes or even petty crimes, as was a way of ensnaring people in a cultural state to use them against revolutionary movements and this was what was known as COINTELPRO. So there's like a lot to unpack there. And it's like, okay, do we have to have some standards, and there are standards that we're gonna have to stand on, right? So it just, I think it's a messy situation to say the least.
It's certainly a messy situation. I think of though when I think of Pan Africanism, I think of solidarity. I think of us as a people moving forward. But people's identity is more expansive than I think Pan Africanism has accounted for. I will say, and
I
and
would
and
agree
we
with that.
and we see that. I think that that is the narrative, that is the concern when we talk about leaving some folks out of those conversations, because I mean, particularly when we talk about needing solidarity, then we need to have conversations with other folks about not only their identities, but what does that look like in community, just
Hmm.
for understanding sakes, first of all, so that we can understand one another, and then when we can have a mutual understanding. And I heard one sister say that, you know, as a community, we need to have shared values.
Hmm.
And once we can agree upon some shared values, then we can begin to move forward in solidarity. Part of the issue is that we don't have, that we can really agree upon
Right.
a shared value system.
And many would argue that the lack of a shared value system is a result of African people adopting alien value systems. Many would argue what? Abrahamic religious beliefs, um, ideologies that are antithetical to our existence. So many would argue that is one of the reasons why. Because, traditionally we are communalistic people. We value family, accountability, right? We talk about traditional African culture. Once again, for those who are just tapping in, traditional African culture, we define it as African culture independent of European and Arab influence. Everyone is held accountable. The men hold the man accountable. The women hold the women accountable, right? And so many would argue that is one of the reasons why we aren't able to have a set of community values. But then the argument is made that one of the ways that we are able to do so is by tapping back into the best of our traditional culture. This concept of Sankofa, this concept of being African-centered, as Molefi Asante talks about in his 1980 seminal text, Afrocentrism, right? So these are some ideas that, of course, have been made in the academy and in the community to seek to what? Restore the African mind culturally, ideologically, spiritually, and, of course, even intellectually. So, but you said you're on the job, so you want me to tap in. Understood. Sister Paula, still waiting on you, sister. Still waiting on you. Want you to tap in, absolutely. Rich, the African elder, if you're still there, would love for you to tap back in as well. Then we're having a great conversation this evening. And so then the argument that many make is okay, the concept of being queer, many would argue, according to, of course, what the brothers and sisters are saying, is a Western concept, right? And so, are we? See, how can I put this? Are we moving away from what it means to be African centered, right? Because we know one of the core tenets of Pan Africanism and Black nationalism is racial pride, being culturally congruent. Um, so that's an argument that many people are making as well. I would argue that, of course, we should not oppress our own, and that individuals who practice what are considered non-traditional lifestyles should not be criminalized, oppressed, or physically assaulted. And of course, we're seeing that a lot on the African continent. And I think that's where this is coming from, is that individuals are unable to live their lives unencumbered from, of course, political oppression. And I think that's the major issue here.
I would agree. And I guess the question that I would have, because I believe one of the comments I read was like, you- about like men and women. The question is why do we have to? Why is that is I would say that I would agree that that is a European standard where we have to classify and categorize people so that then we can other them for whatever political oppressive means and measures. The question is how would a world of a Pan-African world look when we didn't even consider that? We just considered who we were
Mm-hmm.
as an African people and move forward using those tenets.
Okay. Very good. Mr. Sandman says women's rights and LGBTQ rights have been riding the coattails of the civil rights movement since the 1960s. Okay, Mr. Sandman, you're a regular contributor. I want you to tap in and just unpack the argument that you're making. I'm gonna ask the why. I'm gonna ask for examples. You guys always do. You got to give me some examples to substantiate the claim that you're making. But look forward to hearing from you as well. So one of the things that I would argue is that um, in terms of a gender binary, identifying people, that was something that was done in traditional African culture, and that people were othered for various reasons, right? But of course, that was not, and from a Pan-Africanist frame of reference, it was before African people even viewed themselves as singly African, right? Individuals define themselves based on the ethnic group or nationality. But I mean, it's something to consider, something to consider. But I also think that in reality, you're never going to be able to accept everybody, right? I remember I was somewhere, or somebody was like, "But I'm not better than anyone." I said, "I'm better than a whole lot of people: criminals, child abusers, pedophiles. So I'm better than a whole lot of people, right?" So I said, I can't get with you there, right? There are certain behaviors that for me are just are no go, right? So, and then we know traditionally in our culture, when people engaged in socially deviant behavior, they were excommunicated. That was a reality. That was a form of criminal punishment. People were excommunicated. A good example of that we could find in Chinua Achebe's book, Things Fall Apart. So, something to consider as well. Something to consider. But Mr. Sayman, looking forward to hearing from you. And Sister Paula, you stated if we got a panel, you was going to tap in. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And of course, us really opening up that conversation you had regarding if you don't stand in solidarity, right? And one of the questions, one of the arguments people have made, like I said, I did a lot of reading this weekend, is many people argue that the goals of the queer community or the LGBTQ community aren't the same as aren't aligned with the political agenda of Black radical organizations, right? Seeking a redress from, of course, foreign domination, neocolonialism, so on and so forth, economic exploitation, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's something to consider, right, as well. When determines about why there is a schism, why there tends to be a lack of acceptance. I know from a lot of the organizations I've been part of, one of the tendencies that we tend to find take place is that if individuals are allowed into the organization, their focus is on moving the organization towards a LGBTQ platform and agenda rather than one that is rooted in the Black radical tradition of audacious self-assertion. So that tends to be an issue as well. It almost tantamount to You may have a person who's a Christian that joined, let's say, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, shout out to Marcus Garvey. And then the goal is to have that organization focus on form of Christian nationalism rather than Black nationalism, right? So then there's a concern there. Well, we're not rejecting the person because they're Christian. We're rejecting the person because they're seeking to change the orientation and philosophy of the organization. So that's something to consider. Any thoughts? Everybody's working tonight. Okay, I see. Right, sensitive subject, so people don't want to tap in. I think that's what it is, but it's all good. All right. Okay. So you say, look at the African Renaissance Monument in Dakar, Senegal, man, woman, child. That's one of our greatest symbols here to get to our diaspora. Got you there. Yeah, one of the major issues is that it costs so much money to build that that monument. So something to consider. But any thoughts, Sister Marie, on some of the information I shared? And I appreciate you using the pseudonym, sister. I appreciate you using the pseudonym. Very good. Very good. So peace, family. If you're watching, make sure you tap in. This is a dual stream between Bequalon Network, the Pan-African Social Media Extraordinaire, and of course, Lumumba Speaks, the Black Empowerment Initiative, where we believe we're getting a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. But as Sharif says, currently the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris administration made several attempts to force LGBTQ agenda on Black Africa, West, East, Central, Southern Africa. So let me ask you this question, Sharif. Who are you voting for in the upcoming election, right? Just a question I have. Just piqued my interest based on the comments you made. So I want to hear what is your perspective on that? Do you think that's a Democrat issue, Republican issue? What are your thoughts? And the reason I'm asking this question because many people argue, well, I'm going to vote Republican because Republicans are for repressive policies against the LGBTQ community. We tend to find they're very repressive against us as well, particularly in terms of banning books, DEI, so on and so forth. So you say lazy scholar DEI is still considered something only white folks should consider. So I need you to tap in because I don't know what you mean by that. I don't know what you mean by DEI is something only white folks should consider. So lazy scholar, tap in. You're already using a pseudonym. You do not have to turn your camera on, but I really want to unpack and really understand what do you mean by
I
that.
would like to know and unpack that too.
Yeah,
I'm ready for
I need to
that.
know. I need to know something every government and organization should consider. Okay, but yeah, tap in. And let's just really get an understanding of what you're trying to say, because sometimes, you're not able to do that by just reading comments. So please tap in. The link is in the chat. I'll put the link in the chat again. And the link is in the description. So I definitely want to hear what you have to say about that. But the Sharif says, I'm not sure who I'm voting for yet. However, I already know that I'm not voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for sure. LMA, I think Pan-African should be heteronormative. That said, it should not harm other orientations. Okay, LMA sounds like LMA to me, but LMA, tap in, tell us your why. What is the why do you think Pan-Africanism should be heteronormative, right? DEI based on race is one thing, but it's given a white supremacist, non-white minority narrative. Okay, so I think I get where you're coming here, right? We talked about the 14th Amendment, what gave African-American citizenship. I believe that's the one that gave African-American citizenship. I think the 15th Amendment gave us the right to vote. And so as a result, it shifted from what African Americans to minorities. And then as a result, everyone else was able to benefit from something that was supposed to be a set aside for African Americans. So I think that's where you're going there. And that in doing so, you're arguing that is something that's promoting white hegemony. So gotcha. We used to term white hegemony here, white supremacy. I don't think white people are superior regarding anything. So we use the term white hegemony. Africans and other non-white groups can perpetuate the same anti-minority actions. So yeah, we definitely need you to tap in. Definitely need you to tap in. I need you to tap in and be part of the conversation when you say Africans, because we're Africans here in America. So are you saying continental Africans? Because and here's the thing, we find this even in our own community as African Americans, individuals are anti-minority programs. All right? I think the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, he is running for governor, and he made a video talking about reparations, in which he stated that African Americans should pay reparations to America because they brought us over here, civilized us, and taught us Christianity. So something to consider, right? Something to consider. Sister Marie,
No.
any thoughts on that?
Is that something to consider or is that crazy?
This is what he said.
Absolutely
In fact,
asinine.
and
And
your boy Trump said that I think Mark Robinson is his name. The lieutenant governor was a greater African American than Dr. King.
you know what? I disrespectfully disagree. On
Literally, right? Literally.
literally, because that sounds like some Haiti France stuff. Nobody about to sit up here and pay y'all for. You know what? I'm not gonna be angry on that one. I will say this. Part of the issue when we embrace these like heteronormative type of policies and politics, for some reason we just take it too far. So even as we are sending groups of students to places like Ghana, we have students who are afraid to go, right?
Mhm.
And
Right.
you should
That's so
not
true.
go to places that you're afraid. And
Afraid
they're
to go, yeah, which is
afraid.
reality. You get locked up. That's a reality.
Well, they're afraid because even if you're at this point, particular point for what I've read, even if you know that somebody is in the LGBT community, you can be face some sort of penalty. That's a
Right.
problem. We
Right.
should not be advocating for policies in any way that would harm people based on sexual orientation. Now, that doesn't mean you have to like be all in agreement with it, but
Right.
also African people should not be harmed.
Right. And that's the argument I made when we talked about traditional African culture was tolerant. People weren't criminalized, harmed, discriminated against, even though it wasn't considered normal behavior, it wasn't socially acceptable behavior. So just, I mean, something to consider there. So yeah, the link is in the chat, Lazy Scholar. The link is in the chat. Anti-gay is the most common way we as Blacks can perpetuate in-group discrimination by signaling heteronormative standards that just happen to align with our racial oppressors. So I understand where you're coming in, but I think it's a slippery slope when you say align with our racial oppressors, because there are things that we have in common with our racial oppressors that are just commonalities, right? In terms of the African culture being patriarchal, right? That's the reality. Right, so Lazy Scholar, I just need you to turn your camera on and cue. Okay, you can turn the camera off and then I'll bring you on. Very good. So just some things to consider there, but I understand what you're talking about in terms of the oppressive law. So yes, you can turn your camera off, Lazy Scholar. You can turn the camera off. LMA, I need you to cam up and cue. Then you can turn your camera off. Okay, very good. You can turn your camera off, then we'll bring you in. All right, very good. Now we're going to have a conversation. We'll start with Lazy Scholar. Go right ahead. Lazy Scholar, go right ahead.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me okay?
I'll hear you just fine.
Okay. So the main thing I was saying in the comments, and
Oh, you went out on us. You went out on us.
oh, hang on, there's feedback on my end. Hang on one second.
Okay, so you may need to, if you have YouTube playing in the background, you need to turn it off.
Gotcha. Hang on one second.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, if you have YouTube on, when you tap in, you got to make sure you turn it off in the background or we'll get feedback. And we're not talking about Janet Jackson feedback, which I would like some Janet Jackson feedback. That's a conversation for another day.
Okay, I got it. So my thought process in the comment was that we often think of DEI from the perspective that we commonly see in the U.S., which is a particular racial group typically holding disproportionate amount of power and representation and authority in every level of our government and society. But the hegemony changes its race and ethnicity in different places, especially when you look at it from the regional perspective. And especially when you think in terms of people who immigrate from different countries, they're coming from a different regional hegemonic context where they're coming from people who look like them, where they were run by people who look like them. And they had to engage politically and disagree with people who look like them. So from that perspective, it's not necessarily just DEI from the perspective of anti-white supremacists. There's also other groups, other ethnicities that are perpetrating the same oppressive tactics because they're just simply in the same positions of power.
What oppressive tactics are you referring to?
So certain tactics such as demonizing certain groups of people using religious texts, the Abrahamic religion has been borrowed and used as a narrative in a lot of different governments, ranging from South American governments to African governments to the US, even South Korea.
Okay.
So from that perspective, that is one borrowed tactic that they all use, which is religious narrative to create some idea that your people are superior and other people are inferior on a inherent basis.
Right. I would agree with that. Yes. We've had a number of conversations on my channel about the Abrahamic religious influence. So
Right.
I got you there 100%.
But it's not just race though. It's also the matter of, I mean, well, DI tends to overlook the half of the population that's usually oppressed in the countries that I've mentioned. They're oppressed in the same ways they're oppressed in this country, but they can be oppressed more so using the same religious narrative of the male being dominant, being superior to the woman who must be subordinate on an inherent basis.
So I will say this. That is something that we find independent of Abrahamic religious texts, though. Like I've shared this on a number of occasions. Let me tell my camera one. And we even had a conversation on when we did a major dual stream with B Colon Network, where we talked about oftentimes we romanticize African history and African culture. And what we find in traditional African culture is those societies were patriarchal.
I
So
agree.
that is something that's just based on a Abrahamic religious influence.
I agree, and even in those contexts, they used religion as the narrative. They had an African, they had a god king.
Hold on, very quickly. I've read a lot of literature on traditional African culture, and there's a lot of literature that talks about, patriarchy in traditional African culture, and religion wasn't a part of it. For example, I'll give you an example, and this is about a colorful example, so everybody hold their horses here. If you've ever read the interesting narrative of Olaudah Equiano, right? He talks about growing up in Igbo land, Eastern Nigeria. And he talked about the laws and the customs in Igbo land. He talked about in Igbo land, if a man was to engage in adultery, cheat on his wife, there was no penalty in society. But if the woman cheated on his wife, the penalty was what? Death. And that wasn't based on religion. It's just the laws that the man made. So I just think it's important that we do not paint with a broad brush when we talk about these, when we talk about these issues.
Again, I agree. This is again a example of how narratives paint the picture of who's in charge and who's not in charge, who's superior and who's not superior. And religion is an example of how we can see different regions make sense out of who they are going to consider worthy and not worthy in positions of power.
Gotcha.
But there are different ways and different tactics. Ideology would be another one. And that would be a completely different topic, but of course they do blend with each other. Ideology and religion.
Okay, very good. LMA, what say you? You go right ahead. LMA, you can go right ahead. Okay, you just muted yourself, so I need you to turn your camera. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
I was talking. Hey, my bad, man. I think this thing's not working well. Yeah, I made the comment earlier about Pan-Africanism should be heteronormative, but allow room for other orientations. I just think that for any society, especially when it comes to homosexuality, for one, I think that these other orientations are a minority. I mean, I'm not saying that minorities don't have rights, but I'm just saying that they're a minority, and there's only one sexual orientation to actually bring forth children, right? So, I mean, like I said, you can have two dudes, they can go at it for, days on end, but all it takes is, one time between a man and a woman, and then that woman can give birth. Um, and so for me, and I think that when you have, especially now that, in, modern times, we have this, what they call it, the gender wars or whatever. And I think that in order to have strong, in order to have strong, nations, you need strong communities. In order to have strong communities, you need strong families. In order to have strong families, you need strong men and women coming together, dealing with each other, loving each other, putting their resources together, bringing up children, and putting their minds together to raise those children. And so for me, it just needs to be, as from my, the way I look at it, I mean, what 99.999, you can take the nines as many as you want. Children are produced by heterosexual relationships. I mean, yeah, you may have a few. I think that one guy in China, cloned that one baby. So that's like number one out of how many, hundreds of billions of humans that were born. So to me, it needs to be, put it this way, if all of the homosexual and queer relationships were just horrible, like constantly fighting, disruptive or whatever, one, they're a small a small percentage, but that's kind of like isolated to them, what I'm saying? But if heterosexual couples aren't getting along, that affects the community. I mean, one is, like I said, it's a larger portion because most people are heterosexual, and then but secondly, children. So whatever dysfunction comes from the heteronormative, I mean the heterosexual relationship, is going to be dispensed to the children. So that's why for me it's just that we need to build up our heterosexual, and like I said, we need some therapy. We need to look within and get the bigger picture. But that's just me.
Okay, so I would say this as a retort. I think any relationship that is dysfunctional, it could be romantic, it could be familial, it could be platonic. If it's dysfunctional and unhealthy, that could have a negative. It could have an adverse effect on the on the community. Because that person could leave home, leave wherever they're at, and do harm to the community.
Right.
So I don't think it just. I mean, any relationship, homosexual, heterosexual, romantic, etc.
I guess the point I was making,
if it's unhealthy, it could cause harm to the community.
Yes, but I think the point I was making was that like say you have a heterosexual couple, saying since they're the only ones that can have children, their dysfunction will bleed over to children faster than, let's say, what I'm saying, because the only way, what is another way, but like the main way that
I don't mean to cut you off, but people who are heterosexual can adopt children.
Say again?
People who non-heterosexual people can adopt children.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Hey, they can adopt children, but okay, how did that child come up for adoption other than, let's say if the parents died, an unfortunate accident, but most of the time the heterosexual, they were dysfunctional, so that child ended up being up for adoption. So even, the homosexual relationships are, so, but for me, it's like,
how do you define dysfunctional?
Well, I mean, like a dysfunctional relationship.
But you said put the child up for adoption or dysfunctional. So I'm asking, how would you define dysfunction? Because I mean, people put children up for adoption for a multitude of reasons.
I would say that let's say financial reasons, drug-related reasons, mostly economical drug-related issues. I guess that would be my two that come to mind right away.
Okay. So, and I'm just asking questions, so don't take it personal. So when you say economic, so are you saying that the working poor are dysfunctional because they may not be able to afford?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, I'm just asking a question. Lazy Scholar, I think you wanted to provide.
I didn't imply that. No. I'll just, okay, put it this way. There's the working poor, and then there's like the poor, like the step below poor, where it's just like you have to really think about, okay, can I honestly, and I'm not talking about whether or not they should or they shouldn't or this situation should be in, but I'm saying, like, if you're in a real life situation and you make, I'm talking about, you're just scraping by and now you have another mouth to feed. it may be, it may come across like, okay, maybe it'd be best just to give this, put the child up for adoption. Then maybe someone else who had better means can take care of the child. So that was just two things that came off the top of my head.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. It's just that some would argue that's coming off, and I need you to let's see here because I'm getting feedback when I'm talking. So you got to turn your YouTube off and the YouTube off in the back. But what are these? Many would argue that's a form of eugenics, to where people who are only doing well socioeconomically should be open to allowed to have children. I'm just putting that out there. That some people are looking at it was an argument that eugenicists made 100 years ago. Right, and LMA, I need you to turn your YouTube off in the background because we're getting feedback when you turn your mic on. Lazy Scholar, go ahead.
First, I'd like to address the point you just made about eugenics. I don't know if we realize this, but on a domestic level as well as internationally, younger, poorer people are having the children. Okay, they're the ones having the children. The older, educated, affluent people, they're not having the children at the same rate. Okay, it's just the fact. We can't be elites and make decisions and run the world and make the research and do everything while also making children. That's why you're going to have a certain demographic having more children than others. So eugenics is flawed by design because we need people, and we need people of all kinds, and we can't just rely on the smartest or strongest having children, because we need diversity in order to address things like diseases, genetic disabilities, immune systems, politics, because the more we're interacting with one another, the more interdependent we're becoming. And I think that brings me to my next point when it comes to addressing not just the 99%, but addressing the 1% that is actually much bigger than you realize. Okay, there's a thing called the spiral of silence. That means we as heteronormative people are only dealing with heteronormative issues and seeing heteronormative images and are worshiping heteronormative religion, such that we are going to ignore the people who fall between those cracks, the people who it doesn't speak to, the people who don't resonate or align with it. Just because they are a minority doesn't mean that they should be ignored. And if we could understand DEI as a moral imperative in that way, perhaps we as Black people wouldn't have to fight as hard as we do and die as often as we do to prove that we deserve rights.
So hold on real quick. So that I would disagree with. I listen, that I would disagree with. It doesn't matter what we believe in. The case is, if you are African in this world, you're going to be hunted, you're going to be destroyed. That's a reality. So I would argue that
but you have to explain that reality. You have to explain what are the coalitions designing that reality? What are the narratives used in that reality? And then ask yourself, are you borrowing from those tactics, or are you providing an alternative way? Because until we devise an alternative way, we as a people are only going to be borrowing the same oppressive and exploitative tactics. How they treated the Blacks is how we're going to treat the gays. How we treat the gays, how we're going to treat the trans, and so on and so forth.
Can I just say?
Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, basically, we should not be persecuting the LGBTQ community or killing or hunting them down.
I agree.
However, very harsh truths respectfully need to be spoken. So the greatest resource that the African people ever had would be the people of Africa, the population of Africa. That population needs to grow, and its growth needs to be sustained. And the only physiological, biological way that can happen is through a heteronormative relationship. Now, basically, I mean, I'm looking at this from a pragmatic perspective and a religious perspective too. Because if you have and the ideal situation, as you may know, would be that a boy and a girl should live with their mom and their dad, their natural mother and father. One man should be the masculine, the masculine figure, the leader, the hunter, the gatherer. The woman should naturally assume a position, perhaps of, like, child rearing. And now that's just a traditional perspective. I think that'd be ideal for any people, whether African, Muslim, Christian, regardless of who they are. That would be the most ideal situation for them. Now, if you have gay people you have two gay men raising a child, raising a girl. How's that girl going to be raised? Is one man going to be like feminine, or are they both going to be feminine? Or if you have a transgendered woman and a transgendered man raising children, how will they grow up? And who will be the natural biological father? See, these practical considerations need to be thought about deeply if Africa is to move forward. So, I mean, there are pragmatic questions to ask here. However, at the same time, when speaking brutal truth about the growth of the population, you can't, be killing people or hunting them down. And also, I don't want to sound homophobic, and I don't want to sound like I'm transphobic, but I have a theory that the whole LGBTQ movement on the side of gay men is based upon the concept of inceldom. You've got a lot of incel men say gay maxing. That's what I probably believe.
So what is that? What is incel? What does it mean to be an incel?
Oh, so in incel, I mean, it's those men who claim to be involuntarily celibate and they just can't get dates. And that is on the rise in the Western world, apparently, if you look at these statistics. I mean, I don't know how accurate that is, but that seems to be on the rise. And as a result of that, men are going in the arms of other men. That could be an explanation as to why homosexuality is a phenomenon exists. Women, on the other hand, their standards for men is so high that they would rather, have intercourse with other women than have to, intercourse and make intercourse with other men who don't meet their standards. They'd probably rather have intercourse with, like, a pet dog or something like that. So, this
hold up. Wait. What did you just say?
Yeah.
You losing me now. So we
right,
went
about where did I lose you?
You're moving. So are you? All right. Let me get this together here. Did you just make a connection between homosexuality and bestiality?
No, not really. I'm not saying that the same. My apologies. What I mean is, women, nowadays prefer other women rather because I don't know how to explain this. The fact of the matter is women, their standards in men has grown through the roof, and women have a high level of intolerance towards dating men who are just not in the top 10%. And as a result, women are so disgusted in men, the average man, that they would rather have sex with a dog. They would rather have sex with other women than pursue an ordinary man. That's what tends to be going on. I don't know how. And as a result, this has given rise to, like, lesbianism. They would rather have sex with other women than have sex with men. So basically, the LGBTQ has, I don't think it's a natural phenomenon. I think it's sociological, it's environmental. That's what I believe is probably going on. I'm sorry if I've not made any sense, but that's my theory about why the LGBTQ community exists in the first place.
Hey, Lumumba, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. So I know some people want to provide a retort to what Brother Jay had to say, so you all could go ahead. But once again, we want to make sure we're attacking the argument, not the person. No ad hominems.
Yeah, I was trying to speak. I think my microphone was messing up, but I think to Mr. J's assumption, I do think homosexuality is natural. It's not. It may be not common, or maybe considered rare in a sense, where it's not the common. But I do think that it's definitely it's a natural occurring thing. I think that homosexuals have been around us since since forever. So I don't think that it's or to put it this way, there's always going to be some percentage of the human population that's going to be homosexual. I don't think you can get around it. That's just me.
Agreed.
I want to make an earlier point.
Sorry.
My microphone was messing up when I mentioned that about economic reasons or whatever, and you're saying that I was making the eugenics argument. Or I may have been tiptoeing around that. I wasn't trying to, but I was just trying to say, like, why someone would want to give their child up for adoption if they felt that they could not financially support themselves and the child, that they may think that it's more practical to give the child up for adoption. That's all I was trying to get at.
Okay.
I wasn't trying to say that poor people shouldn't have children. I was just saying.
Okay, I got you, brother Bawada. I want you to tap in. Need you to tap in. Sister Medusa says, "What do you mean by natural LMR?" So, Sister Medusa, I need you to tap in, be part of the conversation, so we can make sure we have a robust.
Can I clarify my point as well, please?
I just wanted to say I think she's talking to me about what do I consider to be natural. So what I would say is natural is, like, if you think about, like, let's say clovers, like a 3-leaf clovers. The majority of clovers are 3-leaf clovers, but every once in a while you'll find a 4-leaf clover. That means that the 4-leaf clover is natural because it occurs, but it's not common. And that's what I was getting at. So homosexuality is natural in the sense that it occurs naturally. Some portion of the population, for whatever reason, is going to be homosexual. It's not common because the majority of the population is heterosexual. That's what I'll say.
Can I come in here, please?
Go ahead.
Hello? Yeah, so basically, my point is this. Currently, we have a situation. I mean, I'm not saying that the human being is not capable of producing transgendered boys or girls. They can naturally be produced biologically. What I'm saying is that the majority, I think, I have a theory on this, the majority of those in the LGBTQ community, I don't think are just naturally biologically gay or lesbian. I believe that it's environmental factors and sociological factors that have kind of led to this. Nature will always produce abnormalities, not abnormalities, my apologies, will produce homosexuals, gays and lesbians. But I don't think it would produce the LGBTQ phenomenon to the extent and to the level that we're seeing currently. And, I don't mean to be disrespectful or insolent. I just want to share my theories so that we can solve problems. And I just want to speak sometimes some harsh truths, because candor is and honesty is required if we're going to solve problems and move forward as a people. So if I've in any way offended the LGBTQ community, you have my deepest and sincerest apologies.
I appreciate the respect, brother. I appreciate the respect. The Lazy Scholar, do you want to provide a retort?
Yes. The things that I say can be verified with historical evidence and statistics and cited sources. It's important that if you want to speak on a truth without demonizing an individual or a people, you should speak on the verified facts. And so far, a lot of what I've heard is what I would call rhetoric, which is the use of narrative symbolism, the use of straw man arguments, right? This idea that we should target a particular minority group simply because they are a minority group, not because they present an actual threat to the population. We aren't targeting homosexuality the way we should be targeting pedophilia. We conflate the two and say we are going to be addressing pedophilia.
Hold on, Lazy Scott. I didn't
conflating homosexuality.
Wait. You can't overtalk me. I didn't hear him say anything that was conflating homosexuality with pedophilia. I didn't hear.
I'm not.
I would never say that. I would never say that.
I did not address who said what.
Okay.
I'm not saying someone said something. I'm saying what you can see on the news right now when it comes to homosexual, anti-homosexual rhetoric.
Okay. Gotcha.
They themselves are not providing an issue. They are being conflated with real credible threats.
And I would agree with that, but what I want to say to that is we don't control the news. So we want to focus on what we are saying and what we are doing in the African community, not what the power structure is saying on the news network.
Who's to say there's a difference? How are we saying anything different when we are saying what Fox News is saying about homosexual people, that it's unnatural, or that it's an aberration, or that it's some type of mal condition or treatment, as opposed to just addressing the group for the identity that they want?
I'm gonna answer that question. And I would say it isn't just Fox News that makes the claim that it's unnatural, right? Now, by definition, natural means what the majority of a group does, right? So if I would say
one definition,
I'm not normal, natural, but normal. If I was to say it's normal for kids to go outside and play when they're young, that would be based on that the majority of children do that. So from that definition, a behavior that the minority of a group does would be considered abnormal from that definition.
So to me, the opposite of natural is artificial. Natural is what is created in nature. Artificial is what man has to create by manipulating nature. These groups are not created in a lab, but some narratives will suggest otherwise. No, these groups are emerging out of nature just like we are. So from that definition,
please?
They are natural.
Can I ask a question, please?
Of course.
My question is this. I don't want to sound rude again, but is there such a concept as a gene which is a homosexual gene, or a heterosexual gene, or a how should I say, a transgender gene? Or is there a gene that produces people that are going to be pedophiles? Is there any biological, scientific way to determine, based on genetics, if someone's going to turn out to be gay, lesbian, transgendered, or pedophilic? I mean, once again, I've not seen any research paper or any citations which suggest that this is the case.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a trick question. So in genetics, it's a misnomer
it's not a trick question. It's just a sincere question.
Can't talk at the same time. Can't talk at the same time.
Oh, I thought you wanted to answer. Go ahead.
Yes, I mean, it wasn't a trick question, and I weren't trying to be facetious or anything like that. But I just want to.
That there's usually more than one gene used to express a particular trait. It's not just one gene. It's not one out of billions and billions. It's more like thousands or millions of a gene that can be expressed or activated. And they are activated at different levels of development and at different stages, in the sense that you don't know whether you're going to grow a full beard in the womb. So that's a gene expression. It's the same thing. We don't have the technology. We do not have the technology to make those types of quantum leaps in determination of genetic duplication, cellular growth, whatever have you, to determine what the gene expression is going to look like at iterations from now. We don't have that technology. But what we do have is the idea to imagine a moral imperative that can treat all people equally.
So basically,
real quick, I don't think anyone is advocating that brothers and sisters, are at least here on this platform. I know that wouldn't be the case because they wouldn't be here. Are advocating for brothers and sisters who are of the queer community to not be treated equally. As I said before, when we look at traditional African culture, there was tolerance. Individuals were not criminalized, discriminated against, or assaulted. So I don't think that anyone here is advocating that.
To me, the very discussion of heteronormative society or a heteronormative government or even heteronormative policy is inherently unequal. Because why did you even have to set that? We're all human. We all need to be governed as humans. So
I'm gonna answer the question. The reason why I had to say that is because we see that people who are members of that community are being dehumanized, are being criminalized, are being discriminated against, and are being attacked. So that's why I had to say that, because the opposite of what I said is what's taking place.
Exactly. And but it's not just you and me having this conversation. Other people are listening, other people are tuning in, other people are talking out loud. And I'm trying to speak to everybody when I say we don't have the technology to parse everybody out and choose who we want to include in our world. But what we do have is the moral capacity to include everyone and to mete out justice when it's appropriate.
Dr. Brother Lumumba, can I speak now?
Go right ahead.
Sure. So I do have a problem with our queer so-called brothers and sisters. I do have a problem with queer theory and queer thinking, especially when it's coming out of academia. I do conflate queer theory with pedophilia. And the brother talked about bringing evidence. Where would I have gotten these kinds of ideas from? I gave you a video. I don't know if the brother knows who Dr. Derek Jensen is.
I don't know who he is.
Sure, but I said
video, so I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know what the guy's going to say, so I'm not going to play.
No, I understand. You don't have to play it. You don't have to play it. You could play it at your own discretion when we're off air. But he gave statements from the leaders of this so-called idea of queer theory. The different leaders, Gail Rubin. He mentioned the names: Gail Rubin, Pat, I think Kelly Faith, something like that. Judith Butler. He made several quotes in reference to them entertaining the idea of pedophilia and how pedophilia is something that is a normative behavior and should be accepted. This is the top queer theorists think. So if the top queer theorists think these kinds of ideas and have these ideas in their minds, imagine the rank and file people on the streets.
Well, hold on, real quick, Brother Bawana. I do want to say that you can't hold everyone to the ideas and machinations of a scholar. For example, this is my platform, Lumumba Speaks. I could say something that is inherently problematic. That doesn't mean my 2,640 subscribers would agree with that. I just want to put that out there as a critique or retort to what you said. Honestly, I hear what you're saying. I'm not trying to sharpshoot you. Everybody's going to have a right to respond, but I think that could be a stretch, but I understand where you come from. That you are
no problem.
Argument, and they're trying to disseminate that, but that doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with what they're saying.
Absolutely, Brother Lumumba. I entertain divergent views and divergent opinions wherever it comes from any quarters it comes from. I am just suggesting. You giving me the Christian argument. You can't judge the Christianity by their adherents. Their followers, yeah, and I'm saying, we're not
going to do the Christian thing today.
I'll leave it alone. I'll leave it alone, Brother Lumumba. I'll leave it alone for the night. I'm just saying.
No, you can go ahead. I just go right ahead.
No, I'm just saying because I didn't want even to touch this subject, but I'm just saying that the major theoreticians of this whole idea of queer theory has coupled together pedophilia.
Are you saying this in terms of when people talk about age is just a number and every identity is fluid? Is that what you're talking about?
No. I'm talking about the ideology, the thinking. When you hear certain things come from out of academia and when you hear it in the mouths of the rank and file people, for instance, this whole idea of feminism, this whole idea of patriarchy, these things that's in the common dialogue for the common man, they are coming out of academia from on high. So I'm saying that these ideas must come from somewhere. Where do these ideas come from? And what I am saying is, if the foundation is off, if the foundation is wrong, the house that's built on top of it will eventually crumble. Something is wrong with the house. So I'm saying that if the builders, the framers of these ideas, all of Foucault, all the framers of these ideas, if the foundation is built on what it's really built on, then the rest of the house will be wrong. And this is the reason why I am against it. So, like I say, if I have to be the only one on this panel who is against this idea of queering Pan-Africanism, I will be the only one to be against it. That's what I'm saying.
I really like what you just said about how if the foundation is flawed, eventually it will come down. That's what we're seeing right now across all developed countries, because these countries relied so much on racial purity and focused so much on keeping their women in the homes making babies that they didn't account for the natural decline of their population. That will happen everywhere. It happens in Japan, where it's almost all the same race. They have policies that are trying to make people have babies. They don't want to have the babies. It's happening in China. It's been happened in Europe. And it's going to happen in South America and Africa too, once they reach a certain development level. People stop having kids. And if you have a government that is designed on males in charge and females making babies, and your population declines, you're going to have huge gaps in your workforce. That's what we see in Germany. That's what we see in Japan. They're having to pull people from other races, younger populations, like I was mentioning.
Lazy Scholar, we want to focus on the African reality, not what non-African people are doing in their countries.
Well, the African reality is we are the young population that people will be feeding from. We are one of the young populations people will be feeding from, because they are in a crumbling house built on the idea of men working and women not working.
The highest form,
reproduction being the hinge.
Let me 1 second, Jake. The highest
No
form,
problem, boss.
the highest form of African civilization is in Egypt. In Egypt had dynasties that lasted 2,000 years. And they gave me an example. When they put their images up on the wall and their statues, they put a woman next to a man, not a man with a man. That's not in the customs of the highest form of our traditions and culture. So you may say Western world is crumbling, but it's supposed to crumble. It's built on gangsterism, which is different from what I'm talking about. And my civilizations last thousands of years, not a couple hundred. So you can't pair African civilization with the Western civilization, which is built on murder and genocide. We're talking about two different things, brother. And it has nothing to do with the fact that you kept a little white woman in the house. I was mistreating her and doing whatever you did to the white woman. It had to do with what you was doing to the slaves outside of the house that causing the Western civilization to crumble, and what you did with the Arawaks and the Indians before them. So, I mean, let's not, like you say, you don't want to couple things together. Let's not couple the relationship with the white woman and the white man in his house and what he was doing with the slaves outside. We're talking about two different kinds of things, brother.
Well, if we look at the DNA of most Blacks in these areas where slavery took place, you're not going to find too many of us that didn't have some dynasty, some historical tie to that white man or white woman. That's just a fact. So we as Black people outside of a particular country we can call our own, we don't really have that privilege.
The
You know,
privilege.
what I-
Whoa. So
Wait,
you, what you are?
hold on, Bolana. The privilege.
Okay, I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry.
Yeah, what privilege are you referring to?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, you said we don't have that privilege. What privilege are you referring to?
We don't have the privilege of decoupling ourselves from the relations of the white man and the white woman. If we are, well, I myself, coming from the Black belt, cannot decouple myself from the relations of the white man and the white woman. I, as an American Black person, cannot decouple myself from the images of the white man or the white woman.
Yes, you can.
I don't have that privilege.
Yeah, yes, you can. Yeah, yes, you can. In fact, I'm thinking of when you study Black psychology, they go over how one could deal with the miseducation that we received and how you can you can become educated, you can heal, you can become educated, and you can fight all in one.
Sure,
So we can decouple
sure,
ourselves
yes, you can.
from those oppressive and Eurocentric ideologies and ideas and behaviors.
Sure, you can reverse the effects of the doll test. You can reverse the effects of the doll test. You can reverse some of the effects of feeling inferior, but you cannot escape that context. You can't escape the story of your hair and your natural hair journey. You can't escape the journey of your experiences with white people. You can't escape the masking,
Right.
the code switching. That's what I'm saying. You
okay.
cannot decouple that.
So
And even when you move us,
you can't overtalk me on my platform. This is what I would say. Well, the goal isn't to escape anything. We don't believe in escapism. The goal is to confront and overcome. Right. And so the other thing I would say is we talk about, the process to develop a healthy Black identity. I think that's what you're referring to, Nigrescence theory, right? And coming to grips with your natural hair and your skin tone and our noses and our lips. Well, some of the critiques of Nigrescence theory that came in later generations is that you don't have to go through a process of hating yourself or disliking yourself and then learning to love yourself if you are raised from an African-centered perspective from the get-go. And this is something I'm proud to say I've done with my children. So they've always been proud of who they were. They've always claimed to be African, were proud of being African, learned their history before they even walked into a school. Right. And so we can decouple ourselves from those negative cultural norms that our ancestors and had to experience.
To me, I'm not hearing decoupling. To me, I'm hearing re-education. I'm hearing racial tension management.
No. It's not re-education if that's what you're taught first. Re-education means that you were taught one thing and now you're being taught something else to contradict or what.
Okay, I understand. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, so from that perspective, then I don't see decoupling. I see primary education. That doesn't mean they're not going to get that secondary education in the real world. Well, yeah, and that's where the decoupling isn't going to happen.
Well, so here's the thing. Anti-Black racism is ubiquitous. It's omnipresent. It's everywhere in the world. It's global and affects us in all areas of human activity. So the reality of the situation is what we want to teach subsequent generations is how to effectively combat anti-Black racism so that it cannot negatively affect their lives and their life possibilities and experiences.
I do agree that it's everywhere, and I do agree that it's ubiquitous, but I don't agree that it's going to be the same everywhere. No, because the narratives are going to be different.
Never said it was.
Right. I agree that you didn't say it would, but those differences matter. Those differences matter. And I'm suggesting is that education and arming oneself is essential. That's essential. That's beautiful, but that's not decoupling.
So two things. One, provide a definition of decoupling. Two, can you provide an example of differences in terms of maybe anti-Black racism in Brazil as opposed to the UK or Australia?
Anti-Black racism where?
Brazil, the UK, and Australia. Because you said it's not the same.
So you have skin bleaching in Brazil. You have skin bleaching in Brazil precisely because of, it's not precisely because these areas likely had some level of dark skin discrimination before, but it was nowhere near the level that would occur once they had European colonial influence. So with Brazil, you had Portugal coming in and colonizing them. Mm-hmm. Portugal's white. There is a incentive to reflect that hegemonic features. There is an incentive to resemble the colonial heritage. So there is colorism in Portugal. There's colorism in Brazil. UK, that's going to be slightly different. UK had active slavery, had active white supremacist initiatives and programs throughout the country. I mean, not throughout the country, throughout the globe, as the European, as one of the flagship European empires. So from that perspective, the UK Black has a more unique context versus the US African American.
So let me ask you, I mean, I don't understand, what is the point that you're trying to make?
The point I'm trying to make is that we're treated differently in different places for different reasons.
We understand Wait. We understand, as Pan-Africanists, we understand that, but we also understand that irrespective of how we're treated differently, we also know that it's interconnected through a global system of anti-Blackness. So that's what I'm saying. I don't understand why we're going down this rabbit hole.
I think, okay, so what we haven't addressed yet is the fact that while we're treated differently, negatively across the board, there is always that overarching hegemonic perspective of white supremacy that's over every single country's head. Every single regional group's head.
We use the term white hegemony here at Lumumba Speaks, white hegemony. But yeah, okay. But once again, we know this. That's why I don't understand why do you feel the need to say these things, because this is common knowledge.
It's so when you say how do we decouple or this is decoupling, we're not fully understanding that we're seen as the bottom to their top in the narrative.
Well, no,
you can't decouple that.
We understand that.
Well, then I guess I'm lost in terms of how we feel like we're decoupling, as opposed to just educating, reinforcing, or miseducating, or re-educating rather. So because that's where we started this when it came to decoupling.
So what is your definition of decoupling? What is your definition of decoupling?
Not having a relationship with that other group. One group no longer having that relationship with the other group from the perspective of financial and social and cultural ties. They are independent.
Okay, gotcha.
And no group under this world is independent.
Right. Yeah, but this is reality because we live in a global world now. So that's I don't even think that's realistic. We live in a global world, so there's no way you're going to be the decouple. Now, what we can advocate for and accomplish is what African self-governance, African self-determination, building and controlling our own institutions and our own communities. That is something we can do. But the concept of decoupling, I don't think that's realistic because we live in a global world now.
Are we talking Pan-African or African?
Pan-African.
So if we're talking Pan-African, we're talking about people who have historically or genetically other races, right? They are made up of other ethnic backgrounds.
Well, so you're conflating, right? Pan-Africanism advocates that advocates what? That the person is psychologically African and biologically African. Right now, we know that some of the fathers and mothers of Pan-Africanism were of mixed racial ancestry, but that was due to what? Forced miscegenation, known as sexual assault, right? However, one of the core tenets of Pan-Africanism, I don't know if you are aware of this or not, is anti-miscegenation. So if someone was a Pan-Africanist, that person would not be in an interracial marriage, relationship, or engaging in what? The creation of an interracial child, a biracial child. That is antithetical to the core tenets of Pan-Africanism. With that being said, I still don't understand what's the point you're trying to make.
I'm trying to bring home the purpose of DEI and how diversity, equity, inclusion is going to need to be the backbone of Pan-Africanism in order for it to hold intellectual weight across all different groups that would characterize themselves as African. How are Pan-Africans deciding on genetic Africanism? Because, for example, the South considers it as one drop of black blood. That's my point when it comes to.
I stated based on if the person is genetically African, if they're biologically African. So a good example of someone who was a Pan-Africanist was P. Thomas Fortune. Right, and I think he was a quadroon. right? But he was biologically African, but he was also psychologically African. So I don't know. See what the confusion is.
So what? And so for context, when I think of Pan-Africanism, I'm thinking about it from different policy perspectives. Because take, for instance, Ghana has a Pan-African initiative where they're willing to include people back to the country if they can prove to some degree that their ancestors belong there or came from there to in some say, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the logic behind Pan-Africanism, or is this a different working definition?
So Ghana historically, at one point, particularly after independence, had a Pan-African government when Kwame Nkrumah was leading. All right, we know Ghana now has the Panifest. They even have, where many African Americans can do what? Gain citizenship. But the goal of Pan-African, the basis of Pan-Africanism is the advocacy for African people at home and abroad to live their lives independent and unencumbered of what? Foreign domination. And to develop institutions that based on our own culture.
Understood. Hello. So I guess that's where my confusion was, because Pan-Africanism isn't a tribe.
No,
it's not a specific ethnicity. It's not a specific.
No.
So from that perspective, you would DEI is inherent in the backbone. So from that perspective, it would be a can you're going to kick down the road if you try to create a heteronormative narrative around a initiative that in its core is diversity, equity, inclusion by necessity.
No. And I'm going to tell you why. Because when we talk about Pan-Africanism, there's also a cultural component. That means that we are living our lives in a manner that's congruent to our historical cultural personality. So if someone brought an aspect or an idea that was incongruent, right? So for example, somebody can say, well, DEI promotes miscegenation. Well, that's incongruent with the core tenets of Pan-Africanism.
So we need an African country to be progressive in its gay agenda in order for Pan-Africans to feel comfortable in expressing it as Pan-Africanism?
I don't understand the question.
Well, you said if it's incongruent to the tenets of African culture, where do those tenets come from?
I said the tenets of Pan-Africanism.
Where do those come from?
Yes, well, the first written Pan-Africanist manifesto was written in 1829 by, golly, somebody help me. What's his name? I got to look for the book behind me. David Walker, right? And we find Marcus Garvey's Philosophy of Opinions of Marcus Garvey, right? Classical Black nationalism, modern Black nationalism from Garvey to Farrakhan. So there is a large amount of extant literature on Pan-Africanism and the core tenets and ideas. Matter of fact, the best book I tell people to read is not only David Walker's Appeal on the Philosophy of Opinions of Marcus Garvey, but also Pan-Africanism for Beginners. Right? And once again, when we talk about Pan-Africanism, the core concept of Pan-Africanism is that what? You are African first and foremost. Your African identity is more important than any other identity.
Can I weigh in, please?
I just feel that it's a betrayal, though, to the core message. It was a betrayal when the civil rights movement did it, and it would be a betrayal if the Pan-Africanism were to carry this forward. If you're aware of the gay people that were integral in the civil rights movement.
I am aware. Once again, we're just talking about core tenets. So, for example, there have been a number of individuals globally, African people, who have done great things for African people, right? Have written literature that has helped foment and advocate for revolutions. I think of Frantz Fanon, for example, but he was married to a white woman. So is he a Pan-Africanist? Absolutely not. I think of Amilcar Cabral, who led the revolution against the Portuguese in Guinea-Bissau. In the beginning, he was married to a Portuguese woman. When he started fighting the Portuguese, the anti-colonial war against the Portuguese woman left him, and he realized, hey, I can't be in an interracial relationship and unapologetically advocate and fight for my people. right? So they're just things that are antithetical. What I'm saying is a person can be homosexual and be a Pan-Africanist if their African identity is their most salient identity. That's one of the core tenets of Pan-Africanism, that your African identity is what is most important.
But that's my question. How are we defining the African identity? Because what you gave me was Marcus Garvey and Louis Farrakhan. And Marcus Garvey came to the U.S. before he got deported, and Louis Farrakhan, he's been in the U.S. They can't get rid of him because he was born here. What African culture are we trying to resonate with?
I think you're misunderstanding. When I said modern Black nationalism from Marcus Garvey to Louis Farrakhan, I was just quoting the title of a book.
Okay, yeah. Understood.
Yeah. So hold on real quick. Yeah, I was just quoting the title of this book right here.
Okay. Let me screenshot real quick. Yeah. I'm going to take a look at it.
Yeah. But the other issue is, when we say African identity, is that one of the core concepts of Pan-Africanism, I mean, I would argue is the first concept of Pan-Africanism, tenet of Pan-Africanism, is that your African identity is your most salient identity, meaning that you're what? The fact that you are Black is more important than anything else. It's more important than your sexual orientation. It's more important than your gender. It's more important than your religious beliefs.
It just feels like if we get to actually pick, since our race, since our culture identity got upheaved, you would think we would try to choose a system that didn't just repeat what we've already experienced. We would try to imagine something a bit more inclusive.
Well, no, actually,
can I come in here, please?
No, absolutely not. And the reason why is when you ask, and I'm gonna let you tap in, Jay. When you study slave revolts in the West, right, in the Holocaust of enslavement, the impetus for slave revolts was African identity, cultural retention. So it was the fact that we were maintaining our identity and our culture was the impetus for us fighting back. Now that's saying, hey, I'm going to take on another identity. The other issue is that when you study the enslavement process, and Dr. Adam Missouri talks about this in his book, The Africans of Triple Heritage, he talks about that there was a process of de-Africanization and then racialization, and which we were stripped. They sought to strip us of our African identity, and we moved. And I teach this in my class, and we stopped becoming what Africans and Igbo and Ashanti, etc., and then we became niggers, right, for lack of better words, right? So that's actually the opposite. We actually find, even if you study Black psychology, we find that Black people end up having a healthier identity and a healthier worldview and a healthier sense of themselves when they embrace their history, heritage, and culture, not when they say, I'm going to engage in an abstraction and try to be everything else other than what I actually am. And one of the reasons that we find that our people tend to engage in seeking to have what Dr. Amos Wilson calls an abstract type identity is because we were socialized, indoctrinated to view who we are, where we come from, as something that was inherently negative. So, Brother Jay, go right ahead.
Yeah. So the point is, when looking at how to revive the community, we cannot going with we need to think rationally, we need to think logically, and we cannot be up in our feelings. So we need to do things that are in nature, that are in line with nature itself. We need to have an evidence-based approach, a scientific-based approach as to how to uplift the community. We can't say, this is what I desire, this is what I like. I want homosexuality to exist within the community. We need to take a dispassionate and objective look as to whether or not this will add to the community, or if this will somehow harm the community. And we must have those kind of conversations respectfully. So
let me ask you this, Brother Jay. Let me ask you this. So if the community says this behavior is harmful to the community, then what do you do to people who practice that behavior, that type of sexual behavior?
Right. Well, basically, I mean, I can come on to that in a moment, or do I have to answer that right now?
Go ahead.
Basically, we have someone like Kamala Harris, the US Vice President, and we have Western governments. They're pushing the whole idea and the whole concept of condemning African rulers that undermine homosexuality. Now, I don't think the Western governments really care about Black life, African life, or gay, lesbian African life. Why are they pushing this agenda? And there are many Pan-Africanist um, thinkers that believe they're trying to use this and they're trying to weaponize it in order to slow down the growth of the African population, or they're trying to, ruin the future generations. Because if you have a kid, like I say, raised who has two mothers, or if you have a kid that has two fathers, or if you have a kid that has a transgendered mother and a transgendered father, this could ruin, could undermine the well-being of the child. It is always better for the future generation to live in a traditional household where you have a male figure who and you have a female nurturer, and where both of them are the natural parents of that child. So and you need to like grow the population as much as possible. So that kind of behavior, I don't know how you would deal with it. Perhaps you could, because we cannot prove that this behavior is biological or based on genetics. We can't prove that, someone being into bestiality is genetical. We can't prove that someone being incestuous is genetical. You can't prove that at all. So perhaps this is a psychological issue that you could perhaps give people, more therapy over. I mean, I wouldn't know exactly how to handle or
Wait.
deal
So
with that
are
problem.
you advocating for what they call with sexual? Is it something there's some type of controversial therapy? People was advocating to have people um, receive therapy to not be gay, homosexual anymore. Lazy Scholar says you can prove that it's genetic.
Okay, so basically he's going to have to bring citations on that, because I've actually spoken to many professors in these biomedical sciences departments at universities, and they say, no, it's not genetical. But basically I'm going to need some papers and some citations so that I can, once again, cross-reference and verify what he's just saying. But nevertheless, that could be an idea that we could use. Now, once again, what I'm saying does come across as Hitlerite and fascistic, but I've got to have a dispassionate and an objective view in regards to what would be best in order to improve a community and what would be best in order to grow a strong, healthy community. I've got to think along those lines. And I believe that the concept of homosexuality, as much as I don't want to harm them, I don't want to hurt them, I believe, in all honesty, this could undermine further. This will add to the problems that we already have. This is my deepest concern.
So what do you do then? So you say it's problematic. So what's the solution in your eyes?
Yeah.
If this behavior is considered deviant and antithetical to our development as a people?
So what you have to do is basically try and restrict the behavior to a small group. What you've got to do is give that small group like psychotherapy in order to wean them off that kind of thing. If you ever, sorry, yeah, and if you ever,
I don't think you could do that, brother. I think people are gonna do what they want.
Can
They're gonna be what they want.
can I drop in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I can drop in now.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So earlier I had dropped a message in the chat, and you said you wanted me to substantiate the claim that I made that that the women's rights and LGBTQ rights were riding on the coattails of the civil rights movement
Yes,
of the
sir.
1960s. And of course, I know you're a professor, so I had to do a little bit of research, and a little bit of research I found says that if you look at the chronological order of things in regards to the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement, you will see that, like, for instance, BLM, for instance, that was spurned on after the attacks of those black men like George
what's his name?
George Floyd. Yeah,
George
George Floyd.
Floyd and the other guys. But then we come to find out that BLM is more than just a civil rights organization. Is also a LGBTQ organization. And then if you also look at the chronological order of things that happened in the 1960s, the civil rights movement happened in 1964, and Roe versus Wade happened in 1974, I believe it was. And also the Equal Rights Act that was enacted in the 14th Amendment in 1923 did not include the rights of women until 1971. So chronologically, you can say that the civil rights movement helped spurn the rights of the LGBTQ and women's rights. This is why you always see them conjoined somehow whenever we're talking about equal rights in the United States. It seems like, you know, they're using the civil rights movement as a model to say that, okay, if black people got civil rights, then everybody should have civil rights. And that's just a notion that I have. In regards to sexual
Hold on,
deviancy.
real quick, what it's saying, man. Lazy Scholar, I'm reading the article now that you put in the private chat, and it states here that they focus on causation, most on causation, right? And so I think it's important that they do share that in the article that people engage in queer behavior for a multitude of reasons. Right? And so I think that's important to make that clear.
Someone asked for evidence of a relationship between genetics and homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And I answered the question that genetics identifies homosexuality, but genetics is not sophisticated enough because it's not just one gene, it's multiple genes. That was a misunderstanding of modern genetics at that time, where there was just one gene that did one thing. No, there's a bunch of genes that'll do the same thing. It's a matter of necessary and sufficient in order to express the gene of being triggered sexually by the male form as a male, or being triggered sexually as a woman by the female form, or have feeling like a man in a woman's body, or vice versa.
Well, so hold on. I think that's a great point that you made, but because I've heard this before, where people would say, "Well, I'm in a man's body, but I feel like a woman." But the question would be, how could you feel like something that you aren't and have never been? So how would you even know how that feels?
Let me give you an example. So I biologically am a man, okay? But I have been under the effects of hallucinogenic drugs before. And under the effects of hallucinogenic drugs, I felt new physical sensations in my body.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those physical sensations, it felt like, I don't know how to explain it to someone who has experienced it before, but it felt interchangeable down there. Like it was just a mass of nerves. It didn't feel like it did before. I couldn't feel the external part, but I could still feel the nerve sensation happening deep inside. You know how everyone's nerves work.
Okay, but here's my retort. Once again, here's my retort. And I do have a concern in terms of doing drugs, so I hope you're good on that end. You're well.
Oh, it's fine. This is mushroom.
Okay. But the issue once again is whatever feeling you had, you don't know what it feels like to have a vagina.
Well, of course, but having a vagina, and that's the funny part. Having a vagina isn't necessarily the point when it comes to.
Well, I know that, but I'm saying you just said down there, so I'm just
right. And that's the funny part. I'm talking about it from a heteronormative perspective. So you're gonna have to just bear with me on this with a grain of salt. This is how I make sense out of it. But the intersex person, it varies because You don't know what gene expressions are making them feel the way they do, which is why sometimes
And I agree with that. I agree with that.
good outcomes, and
I
sometimes
agree.
it leads to suicide.
But here's the
Well,
issue.
the thing
Wait,
is,
hold on, son, man. I agree with you there, intersex persons. The issue that we tend to find is you have people who aren't intersex making the argument as if they are. So that once again, it goes back. If some person's intersex, you can't tell them what they feel. They, because of their intersex. The issue is though when someone, it's in my opinion, is when a person says, "I feel like I'm a woman," but you aren't a woman. You don't know what that feels like. Right? Like, for example, I have a daughter who's 14, right? She was with me when she started her cycle, right? I was there with her. We had to go to the store, get all the stuff she needed. But once again, I would never know what that feels like because I don't have the same biological makeup as her. Her mother knows what it feels like because her mother's biologically female, but I would never know. So that's when I say,
right.
To me, it's a hell of a stretch when someone says, I feel like a particular biological entity, but you're not that but you've never been that biological entity. That's like me saying I feel like I'm an orca. How do you know you're not an orca? I don't know what an orca feels like. I don't know what a killer whale feels like because I'm not a killer whale.
But I guess the point I'm trying to get at is the validation is not the same thing as specificity. And sometimes we confuse the two. You can validate the feeling of of something being off with you. You can validate that feeling just fine through DEI, but it's hard to validate that feeling if you're looking at it from that normative lens of, well, that doesn't mean this. So, but okay, how are you going to treat it? How are you going to create that space for treatment?
So this is what I'm going to say. Two things. One, if you're seeking for someone to validate who you are, that means that you're not comfortable with who you are. As an African living in America, I don't need anyone to validate the fact that I'm African, the fact that I'm of African descent. If I'm seeking external approval of who I am, that in itself is problematic, in my opinion. The second issue here is, and I think you would take umbrage with this, according to the DSM, gender dysphoria is a mental disorder to this day.
Right. And being gay was a mental disorder until it wasn't. I'm not surprised. It takes time for people to make sense out of new things because we as a people follow the same pattern of discriminate against it because it's different. Makes sense.
I'm not talking about discriminating against people. I've made that very clear from the start of tonight's show.
I am.
But when you're talking about validation,
wait. You can't overtalk me on my platform. Because validation and oppression are two different things. If my daughter told me, hey, let me tell my camera. If my daughter, I don't want to speak this into existence, it's not going to happen. I'm gonna say that first. But if my daughter told me, hey, I'm gonna go be an exotic dancer, I'm gonna go be a adult porn star, I'm not going to validate that. I'm not going to support that. Doesn't mean I don't still love her. Doesn't mean she's not still my daughter. But what I'm saying is, if a person says, I feel like something that I'm not, that I've never been, that in itself is highly questionable, to put it simply. If I was to say, I feel like I'm a rabbit, you don't know what a rabbit feels like because you're not one. To me, it's just common sense.
Sure. Brother Lumumba, one second. Brother Lumumba, it's okay to feel a certain way. The problem comes, and this is the reason why I would discriminate. The problem comes in is when you put policy behind the sentiments and feelings of an individual who now he says, well, I'm a female now. I could use the bathroom with Brother Lumumba's daughter. That's policy. This is the danger, and this is the reason that there needs to be discriminatory policies against the sentiments and feelings of individuals, because people could wake up in the morning and feel anyway. Don't put legislation in behind it, because that's when it develops teeth, and that's when it becomes very dangerous for innocent people out here who are subject to random feelings of individuals who could wake up any morning and say, well, I feel this way today. No. You don't structure societies like that. And I would discriminate against individuals who just come up to my face and say, well, call me Shirley. Why? Because I feel like it today. No. It doesn't work that way in civilized society, brother. And I do discriminate against people who randomly take mushrooms, because you have to take mushrooms to have these kinds of feelings, sounds like. So when you take mushrooms, you ascend to the feeling of, okay, you call me Shirley now. I feel no. Civil society and a well-structured, well-ordered society doesn't function. That is chaos, and that's what you are entertaining. And when you put policy behind that, this is. I'll let you go, Brother Lumumba. I'll stop, man.
No,
I'll stop.
I'm just not an advocate of discrimination, right? And because I don't know, maybe it's the wrong language, but that is something that my daughter's mother and I had a conversation about. Would we be comfortable with a person who was biologically male using the same restroom as our daughter? And of course, the conversation we had was no. I mean, in fact, most children don't feel comfortable going in the bathroom with someone their own age, right? And so in gender, so that in itself would be.
Can I come in here?
The thing is about
this entire time. They've always been available for both male and female.
What's that?
Family restrooms.
Can I just say?
We talk about family. We talk about the individual male and female bathroom.
But
Can I just say?
That's like if you have a child, but you could go in. They have because typically if you go to like a hospital, for example, or they have like, of course, the men's restroom, women's restroom. Then they have a restroom just like for the family. Like if you have a toddler or something like that. Yes, I know what you're speaking to there.
So basically,
the thing is, a human's sexual urges is a part of his most primal instinct. Is a part of his limbic system. So anytime that a human being is engaging in a sexual act and is not for the means of reproduction, is really a perversity. And us as humans, we have sex just like bonobos or apes, where we have sex for no apparent reason, just to satisfy some type of urges, some type of chemical euphoria that we're trying to get in our brain just to feel it. So just because you say that you're a woman or you say that you're gay and you want to have sex because you have a feeling, all you're trying to do is satisfy an urge. You're not doing it for any reason anything that has any substance to it. You're not adding to humanity by creating another human being through the activity of sex. So it doesn't make any sense to add sexual proclivities when it comes to homosexuality to any movement, because it doesn't add to humanity in any functional way. It's just you're just trying to satisfy your urges. It's no different than me trying to satisfy my urge to drink alcohol or satisfy my urge to eat a cupcake or smoke a cigarette. You know,
or to take drugs.
What's the point?
Well, people would say the same thing about heterosexual sexual activity.
Yeah,
argument people would say is that most people don't have sex to procreate; they have sex to what? Fulfill their sexual desires.
The thing is here, what I believe is that, what makes us different from the animal kingdom is that we have the ability to reason, and we must primarily not give in to our animal urges. We must try to, use reason. We must try and use logic if the community is to succeed and move forward. The issue of homosexuality from a pragmatic, logical perspective would not be a positive, would not be helping the cause of the global community. It will only hurt, hinder, and bring down the community itself. That is the biggest problem. I sincerely think that.
Okay, and what else? And so when you say it would hurt and hinder the community, how so?
No, because basically, if, for example, say this were to hypothetically grow to 80%, 90%, to put the LGBT community, hypothetically, I mean, you would have the vast and overall majority of kids being raised by non-relatives, number one. You'd have a vast and overall majority of kids with two dads, with two mums, or you'd have the vast and overall majority of kids being raised in a transgendered home. And I think that this would cause serious harm to the community, and it would also One more thing, it would also be the least productive way of growing the community and sustaining the growth of that community. It would cause a lot of problems. I mean, we've got problems already, and I think this would only add, and it would, quadruple the problems that are already existing in the continent. Once again, I will say again and again, this is not me being offensive or disrespectful. I respect all people, but actually, we have to have, like I say, an objective and dispassionate look at what will add value to the community and what will perhaps might undermine the community. That's what I think we should have a discussion on.
Hey, Lumumba, I wanted to add something to that, or at least some pushback. Can you hear me okay, Lumumba?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay. To Mr. J's point, I would have to give some pushback to that, in a sense that, I think we should focus. I think maybe the majority of the people on this panel are heterosexual. Instead of, coming up with policies or trying to sequester homosexuality, I think that we socially just need to improve heterosexual relationship, because right now, because you can, let's say, let's say hypothetically, come up with some policy to, sequester all the gay people away, whatever, just hypothetically. We still have, that doesn't do anything for the problems that we have heterosexually. You know what I'm saying? So I think for us, and for me, I don't, honestly, I think that it would, that it would never get to that point of 80%. I think it will always stay a small percentage. I do think that it is genetic. I do think that, yes, there could be some psychological issues that come about later on in life. If you get traumatized or whatever, some type of extreme condition can, push someone, towards homosexuality. But I think that the majority of people in healthy environments will, the percentage of people who are homosexual will be relatively low. But that's not to say that they should be discarded or not. But I'm saying is that we need to focus mainly on our, making sure that we have, emotionally, financially, healthy men getting with, healthy women, and then we have, we improve those relationships. Because right now, what I'm saying, we got divestment, we have black divestors, we have this, red pill movements. Like, we have all these movements where it's just like black men and black women going at each other. And I'm like, then we're talking about homosexuality. Listen, bro, homosexuality is not your problem. You know what I'm saying? Man, your problem is you need to be able to get along with that woman across from you. That's your only problem.
Can I come in here?
Hold on, real quick.
Yeah, that's not gonna, yeah, that's your.
So two things. I think we should be promoting healthy relationships across the board that are romantic, familial, and platonic. Personally, that's what I think. Irrespective, like I said, if you are in any kind of unhealthy relationship, that can have an adverse effect on how you treat others in the community. The second issue is there are a multitude of factors regarding individuals engaging in what people consider non-traditional sexual behavior. A good example would be there's a lot of literature on Black women becoming who are victimized, sexually assaulted, physically abused by men, and so they turn to lesbian relationships. This is a reality.
That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Right.
Or like
I said, there are multitude. Some of it is sometimes it's trauma. We know that if a child is sexually assaulted, that child can become extremely promiscuous as an adult or become introverted sexually. Right.
Exactly.
So I remember when I was 19, I was working with a sister, and she told me that her son was sexually assaulted by a man when he was 4 and again when he was 12. And so her son ended up being homosexual, right? So there are a multitude of reasons why people engage in the sexual behaviors that they do. That's what I think.
And I was just saying that I think that it is genetic, that a portion of it is genetic, and I think that there's a portion of the population that is, through some type of event happened to them that is pushing them on the other side.
Right. I've seen situations where a young lady did not receive, she wasn't getting attention from young men. So she said, I want attention. So she went to a lesbian relationship. So there are a multitude of factors that play a role. And I think that is something that we need to consider. We're just going to be honest. There are a multitude of factors. And
I mean,
there are some people who say, hey, this is just what I'm into. And I've been into this since I was a young child. Got you. There's just a multitude of factors, but I don't think there's a singular factor that you can point to say, this is why this person is behaving the way they are.
according to the research, the genetics has an extremely limited and a very small influence as to whether someone will become a pedophile, whether somebody will become gay, lesbian, or transgender, or whether somebody will become bestial, or whether someone will become incestuous. That has a small effect. I mean, it's mainly the social, psychological, and the issue of the environments that actually push people into it. That's what the research is actually saying. So, the point I was making is that, yes, we need to have strong men who are the hunters, the gatherers, the providers. We need to have women who are child rearing and who are soft as well. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that women shouldn't be allowed to have shouldn't be able to own property or vote or engage in political activism. But the roles, responsibilities, and the duties need to be there within a traditional household, so that you can grow, nurture, develop the next generation of people. And God knows, the African community will definitely need this. What I'm saying is, we don't need further division or further problems down the line where you have children that are somewhat unhealthy. We need to raise healthy kids in the more traditional family units, because this is we need to work, as I've said before, in line with, in sync with nature itself. If you go against nature itself, then you will come across a lot of problems and you will come across a lot of issues.
Everything
Real
is.
quick, real quick. Hold on. Lazy Scholar, put your comments in the public chat, not the private chat. Okay, go ahead, Sam, man.
Yeah, I was just going to say that everything is genetic, So you can say
No,
that it's genetic.
whoa. Everything is not genetic. I just gave examples of people choosing to engage in non-traditional sexual behavior for reasons that weren't genetic whatsoever.
Yeah, well, you can say that it wasn't genetic, but everything that happened in their life prior to them deciding to engage in those gay relationships had an impact on their chemistry on a cellular level. Like they say,
But your genes are your genes from birth.
Yeah, they're your genes, but genetically, your cells mutate based on what you come in contact, whether it be toxins or the food you eat. It all becomes, we're all one. We're part of the earth. You see what I'm saying?
But,
So everything
but
is genetic. Like, for instance, all right, so you could say that it's genetic to be homosexual. Well, the next guy who's a murderer can say, well, it's genetic for me to be a murderer
Right. I
because my
don't agree
great
with that.
grandfather murdered somebody.
I don't agree
So
with that.
yeah, so the thing is, or you can say that it's in my genetics to be a preacher because my father was a preacher. You know what I'm saying? So you can argue that everything is genetic to a certain extent.
Yeah, but and I'm saying
So if you are,
I don't agree with that. I don't agree
I
that
don't
it's
agree with that at all. I don't
right.
agree with
As
that
a
at all.
matter of fact, we found that same type of logic was used to why we were supposed to be enslaved and why we were being
Very,
discriminated.
very dangerous logic.
I
So
don't agree with that.
if your father was a murderer, if your father was a murderer, grandfather's a murderer, then to stop crime or to stop you from murdering someone, I should rightfully lock you up because genetically it's more likely you're going to become a murderer too. This is the argument, and I think that argument is dangerous, brother. It's very dangerous.
Well, I'm not saying, yeah, on the sociological level it is dangerous to, because humans can perceive that, like you're saying, when it comes to like um um civil rights and
I
stuff
mean,
like that. But
hold on, I'm cutting you off though. But hold on. I mean, they made the same argument saying that black men had a gene that predisposed us to being violent. Hold on, and they were saying this in the 1980s, but if you go back to the 1910s, before the 1900s and 1910s, before Jack Johnson won the heavyweight championship, they were saying that black men were weak, passive, and yellow in yellow. So we see the narrative changes based on whoever's in power to justify their dominance and the what demonization of what this other group. That's why I don't align myself with that concept that everything is genetic. But your height might be genetic, the size of your feet, your hands, the color of your eyes might be genetic, but I don't agree that your behavior is genetic. Now, there may be a level of socialization there, right? But no, the lazy scholar says nobody needs gender norms pushed on them due to what parts they're expected to have and use. So I will say, in traditional African culture, there was a thing known as rites of passage. Those rites of passage were gendered, right? You had women rites of passage, men's rites of passage. And part of those rites of passage programs was you were taught how to comport yourself as a man and as a woman in said African society. So we tend to find that in any society, men and women, boys and girls are socialized to carry themselves and behave in a particular way for a multitude of reasons and factors, right? One of the examples I can provide is that, because I have a son, boys are taught that they need to be able to control their person. Now, that's very important because as men, men are seen as dangerous or violent compared to women. And if you lack self-control, you're a danger to yourself and others, right? So there are some aspects of gender norms that are necessary and needed, right? And for a good example, we see this with a lot of Black boys who don't grow up with fathers, and they lack discipline. They end up engaging in criminal activity, right? They don't have anyone to corral them when they're engaging in behaviors that are problematic. So these things are needed and necessary. So when we just say we need to throw out norms and things like that, now I think we get into a place that's problematic because you have to have rules, you have to have structure, you have to have a systematic way of doing things and a concept, an idea of what it means to be not only just a man and woman, but a civilized, productive citizen in society. And so that might change from each household to household, but we also know culturally there's an expectation as well.
There's no
and on the genetic end of it, all the way, in every place in around the world, men are more likely to commit a crime or do something violent than women are, and this is a fact all the way across the world in every culture. And the reason for that is because men have higher testosterone. Testosterone makes you a little bit more violent. That's just the genetics of human nature. You know, our genetically that makes us predisposed to being a little bit more violent than women.
No, not violent.
We have higher testosterone.
The term wouldn't be violent, it would be aggressive.
Aggressive, and aggression has a tendency to turn into violence when it is acted upon by two aggressive adversaries.
Well, no, no. Aggression becomes violence when you have people who can't control themselves. That's because I'm a very aggressive person.
Then why is it that women all the way across the world have less tendency to be less violent than men all the way across the world in every culture?
Because they have less power.
Yeah, they have less power. If
they had more power, they would cause just as much damage.
And in fact, to speak to your point, we can speak to this today in America. Domestic violence today is bidirectional. Because women have equal rights as men, we find domestic violence in America today being bidirectional. And in some communities, women are the more often than not, the majority of the time, are the aggressors in domestic violence situations.
Especially when there are laws that set it up to where if a woman says he hit me, they're going to jail.
Right. So, like I said, I would argue, and we don't want to get too far into the weeds, we want to get back on track, but I would argue that a person having a testosterone and aggression doesn't make them violent. A person lacking self-control makes them violent. And this is something I've told my son since he was like 7, 8 years old. He's 16 now. Right? If you fail to control yourself, somebody else will. And so part of raising a young man into an adult who is a productive member of society is teaching him and helping him develop the ability to control his person. This is typically something you're supposed to be taught by your parents through not only lectures, but also activities as an adolescent. Yeah, because if you fail to control yourself, somebody else will. And for adults, that place is called the county jail.
But at what point, though, does gender norms actually come into play, especially when you look at the context of the single mother and the child, male child in question is getting influenced by male role figures along the way? At what point does gender norms address the reality, which is that a lot of us don't make it to raise our kids? A lot of us have kids and don't know about them. A lot of us end up in jail or dead.
Mm-hmm.
So dead in a war, whatever have you.
I'm glad you brought that up. So that is an issue, right? People do end up in jail or dead. Now, what I will say is from a African cultural frame of reference, what we find throughout the continent is that if the father was not present to raise their young man, it was the job of the uncle to step in and take on that role. Not mom's new boo thing, but the uncle. So that's number one. The second issue is what we do find a lot of young men, and I can say this as a man who was raised by a father. My parents are still married to this day. Hi, mom. Hi, dad, if you're watching, right, or listening. But one of the things that we tend to find, and I've realized this, when I come in contact with men or young men who did not grow up with their father, I could tell right away that there's something missing. They tend to be uncomfortable with their masculinity. They tend to be uncomfortable in the presence of other men. And with young men, they tend to take umbrage when they're receiving orders and guidance and correction from a man, right? So this is something as a man I've seen. I see it right away. In fact, I remember Carmelo Anthony and Kenyon Martin. They were basketball players for the Denver Nuggets. And the coach, the white guy, he's made a number of problematic statements. But George Karl, he was their coach. He said, I had issues coaching them because they didn't have a father in their life. And so it was obvious that they weren't used to accustomed to dealing with male authority and male leadership. And they got all in, oh man, he was talking about my mama, but this is a reality. It's a problem. And matter of fact, I remember when my son's mother, my ex-wife, took my son and she moved away to Maryland. I didn't see my son for 5 months. When I came back, he had a completely different personality. He was very passive. He lacked self-esteem. He wasn't as confident in himself or as assertive. So this is a reality. It's problematic.
We have to address, though, the reality. We can't just stick to the normative discussion. We have to address what we actually see in our communities. And what I see is a lack of association building. We need more community organizations that are built for us, not just by a religious context, but for a Pan-African context.
Okay, but what does that have to do with what I just said?
What that has to do with what you just said is that waiting for a father isn't going to do it. Creating the narrative that we need fathers in the home isn't going to solve the current crisis, which is nobody has a father.
Well, I think that in itself is an oxymoron. If you have a father in a home, then that child does have a father.
Saying we need a father in the home to a child whose father's gone.
You can't overtalk me. The second issue is the CDC did a study showing that Black men in America were more involved in the raising and rearing of their children when they weren't custodial parents in any other racial ethnic group of men in the country. So that in itself has been debunked, right? But what we tend to find is the issue is a lot of young men aren't being raised by fathers due to parental alienation. Dr. T. Hassan Johnson talks about that in his book that he just wrote. It was published last year. Solutions for anti-Black misandry. So this is really the major issue that we're finding with a lot of young men in terms of why they aren't having fathers, right? Raise them. The second issue is you have to be very careful with children because we know the number one cause of children being victims of physical or sexual abuse is mom bringing some random guy, some man that is not the father into the household. In fact, studies show that children are the least likely, had the least likelihood of being physically or sexually abused when their biological father lives in a home. So the studies show that children benefit not only in terms of being the least likely to be physically or sexually abused, but they benefit in terms of they do better scholastically, they do better behaviorally, and they have higher levels of self-esteem. They're less likely to become high school dropouts, become ensnared by the carceral state, and they're less likely to abuse drugs and alcohol when they grow up in a home with their biological father. The studies show this. So this isn't a narrative. These are actual quantifiable facts and data.
But these are not the source. These facts aren't coming from the areas of the widest disparities. These facts and statistics aren't coming from the concentrations of Black areas that have the highest levels of poverty, the lowest levels of education.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Even in matter of fact, I should have said this from the beginning. The studies controlled for socioeconomic status, race, political beliefs, and religious beliefs. It controlled for all of that, and they still found that this was the outcome when the biological father was in the home.
Finding that it's the outcome in the home isn't the same as that. All you have to do is to tell the Black community you just need fathers in the home. That's what I'm trying to get at. It doesn't actually address the people who don't have fathers currently.
Well, everyone has
a lot of them.
Everyone has a father. They wouldn't have been born if they didn't.
That's a sperm donor. That's not a father.
No. Once again, no, we're not going to do that because you don't know why that father isn't in that child's life. You don't know that, so we're not going to just call men sperm donors when you don't know the intricacies regarding why that man isn't in the child's life. I've seen this happen on a number of occasions because I used to work with the Montgomery County Fatherhood Initiative back in 2011, where women would be in stable relationships, have a child with a man, then take that child and move halfway across the country. Is that man a sperm donor? No, that's parental alienation.
We're not talking about that particular niche of the pie. We're talking about the systemic effect of people are having children out of wedlock. Mm-hmm. People are not taking responsibility for these children until a government action is implied or enforced. I would
argue that is not the norm. That Black men only take responsibility when there's a government gets involved. That's completely false. And I would say this: if you are in the Black community, you would know that. If you are in community with Black men, you would know that that's not true.
I'm looking for these communities with Black men. I see a lot of women and I see a lot of children. I'm not seeing a lot of grown men.
Can I offer a solution? Can I offer a solution to the lazy scholar? Sure. So he was suggesting earlier, in terms of no one is talking about the children who have no parents, not biologically, but in a social sense. And what I agree with the idea of adoption. I agree with that, but that adoption should be within the context of what I perceive a family to be: a strong male person and a strong female person. For me, it should not be two men or two women or even a white person coming in. That's in a perfect example. Now I know that doesn't work in the real world, but I would be an advocate for brothers like Lumumba, or brothers who have the ability, financial ability, to take on another mouth, and who is a responsible human being, and who is a heterosexual person, to engage and adopt. I am an advocate of that. In fact, I would even go further. I am an advocate of having private orphanages run by strong men and women who can train and properly organize and rear children in a way that they will be productive members of the society. They shouldn't have these governmental organages, which is just a prison to a pipeline to prison. They should have private institutions, which we should support within our community. Pan-Africans and Black people alike should support private entities where we put into our monies into, where you have children on the streets with no responsible people to take care of them, and we should put a portion of our income, whatever we make, to house the children and ensure that they are properly instructed. So I'm an advocate of that. So that's my solution to what you are talking about, and what you are actually talking about, lazy scholar, in terms of.
Well, real quick, Brother Bawana, I'm glad you brought that up. But like I said, from the African cultural standpoint, the uncle is the one who takes on that responsibility if the father isn't present.
or the
Right.
godparent, right?
Right. No,
You should
the uncle. The uncle. The
Okay,
uncle.
I see. But I know in the Black American, we got like, Black American culture, we have the godparent, right? So the godparent is right there. So if anything happens to your biological parent, you don't have to go to adoption because
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah. But I know you're talking about a
you're
guy
right
because
there.
I'm a godfather to my best friend's sons.
Right.
But
So
I'm
like
just
if
saying
your
from an
best friend
uncle
should
standpoint,
die, then your child comes straight to you. Like there's no
no, it
adoption
comes straight
process. It
straight to
comes
me.
straight to you. Yeah.
Absolutely. So
But I
there
do
are
no,
systems
to
in
add to
place, but I would argue, and this is just someone who's done the work. Oftentimes, when children don't have a father in their life, more often than not, it's due to parental alienation. This is just it's a reality. And what typically takes place is the woman then tries to have some other guy who's her boo thing at the time, what replace the actual father. And we know the data shows this from the FBI, the number one cause of child physical and sexual abuse is mom moving some guy into the house with the child. That's the number one cause. The second leading cause of child physical sexual abuse is what? Religious institutions. 1 and 2. Non-biological guy playing dad and religious institutions are the leading causes of child physical and sexual abuse.
Hey, Lumumba, I'm going to head out soon, but I just wanted to say, to that point, that's what I was saying about heterosexual relationships. Like, if we improve in heterosexual relationships, then a lot of these other issues go away. And I'm going to land my plane there. You guys have a good night.
All right, peace, brother. Yeah. But yeah, when you talk about gender norms, a gender norm is for that black men are what? Dependable, reliable, responsible, and have self-control. Right? You could take issue with gender norms, but those are positive gender norms.
And I would add to that, brother Mumba, and love their children.
Yeah, loving, nurturing.
Absolutely, because there's a propaganda out here where black men don't care and love or want to be around their children, which is absolutely not true. Yes, you have some irresponsible people out here doing irresponsible things and having babies where they're being neglected, but the majority, because we speaking to the majority, not the minority. We love our children and we love our nieces and nephews and things of that nature, and we take care of our nieces and nephews. It's propaganda to think that we are uncaring and unkind to our own children.
Right. Yeah. So we gotta just we're gonna deal with facts and not the hype. Right. And in fact, we even find this concept of black men, African men being nurturing with their children and their wives going all the way back to medieval Africa. Right. So this is just part of our culture, personality. And it wasn't, that we were taking on a feminist perspective. That was a cultural expectation for being a man in that society, that you would be courageous, that you would be loving, that you would be nurturing, that you would be brave and heroic, protector, etc. So just multifaceted.
But you have to understand that was part of the necessity at the time. You had to have warriors, and those warriors had to be physically fit. We wield our war at the press of a button. We don't need warriors.
No, we still need warriors now. I did 6 years in the military, so it's a lot more than just pressing the button. I would know personally. Yeah,
and not only in war. And in war, you don't only have such physical soldiers. You have to have thinkers as well.
Right.
Great thinkers within in any war strategy. So this is the kind of situation that we are creating right now. And listen, Lazy Scholar, I appreciate the fact that you came on here to challenge us from your perspective and your point of view. And I'm not trying to attack you personally. For me personally, it's all about the ideological stances that we take, and I'm just in a different position than you are. On a personal level, me and you probably will sit out and have a beer, but ideologically, we just are at variances. I just want to make that I want to make that clear. So I'll leave it, brother.
Sure, and you're right. I'm coming from it from a different perspective. The perspective I have is that our problem now isn't a lack of warriors. Our problem now is a lack of knowledge workers. We lack knowledge workers across all levels of our society. And part of that is because we've relegated half of our population to reproduction when we are still feeding diversity more efficiently through international immigration and through including other people.
Brother. You're engaging in some hyperbole. You said that we've relegated half of our population to reproduction. Brother, that in itself is just ahistorical and completely false. No one has ever, in the Black community, we have never had the power to relegate our women to doing anything.
Well, you're right. Actually, that's a very good point, especially since they were given employment first.
It's completely false. And as I stated at the top of the show, I don't allow people to make statements that are patently false.
Well, from your perspective, it would be considered false. But from my perspective, what I said was factual. We live in the United States.
Wait, hold up. We do not do subjective truth here on Lumumba Speaks. We deal with actual hardcore history. And a good example, and I'm going to use it to substantiate my point, is the book by Dr. Robert Staples. I actually cite some of his work in my dissertation. Brother Barana, I was doing a lot of writing today, brother. I have 2.5 chapters to write. Well, actually,
you go, brother. You go.
2:14. I'm about 75% done with chapter 4. But okay, back to it.
Yes, sir. Let's get it.
The urban plantation. He talks about there are only 2 institutions in the Black community that are ran independently by Black people: the church and the household. And he stated what he said: the church, the 80% of the parishioners are women, right? So the man is only in the lead because the women agree with him being in the lead. And if they wanted, they could leave the church and go start their own, which I know a lot of women did in the 90s. Number 2, he says the home. He says the majority of the Black households are led by Black women, right? So then you can't state that then Black men are forcing Black women to do X, Y, Z in any way, shape, or form.
That feels like a cop-out, though.
No.
We don't have the power to make a law.
You can't overtalk me. You can't overtalk me on my platform. What I stated is an actual fact. It's not a cop-out. It's a fact. We do not have we've never had the ability, since we've been here in America, and I'm speaking specifically to America as Black men, to dictate what a Black woman does. From a political standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from an institutional standpoint. In fact, Black men are the only race of men in America in which the woman makes more money than them on average. So the claim you made is patently false.
If we are having this discussion and we are entertaining this discussion largely from a heteronormative perspective, without any influence from any white person whatsoever, in my mind, if we were given power right now, we would still, as a group, unfortunately, relegate women to the gender norms that I described. Whether we have the power or not, we have the harmful ideology, we have the harmful narratives, and we have the harmful mindset that once we get a modicum of power, we want to disproportionately wield it. We need diversity, equity.
This is what I say. This is what I would say, because I know this is coming from ideology. As someone who's 40 years old, has been doing revolutionary work in the community since I was 22. The men that I move with don't engage that way. In fact, I'm a very masculine man, right? Brother Bawana can speak to it. I work out on a regular basis. I mean, I have an IG page, is Body by Lumumba, right? I could bench, squat, and deadlift close to 1,500 pounds. So I was in a relationship once, and one of the brothers was like, man, very, very masculine man. And I was telling him how he had called me. I was like, I got to call you back on washing dishes. And he was like, I didn't think that's something that you would do. And I said, well, why is that? He said, you're very masculine, I said, yeah, but my girl, she's such a great cook. I'm like, should I got to wash the dishes out of appreciation just how great a cook she is, right? And I said, so what we tend to find is this sense of duality and part of our culture, right? So I think, in my opinion, that you are promoting stereotypes about Black men that aren't congruent with reality. I think if you are actually in community with Black men, you would know that those things are, and I'm talking about intelligent Black men. I'm not talking about guys who are miscreants and ne'er-do-wellers, but professional Black men, intelligent Black men who are African-centered and Black-minded. You will find that that's not the case. Now, you could find a guy, particularly a Black Republican or someone who's an integrationist, who takes on those concepts and ideas, right? A good example of that to me was Kevin Samuels, who said, well, white people won the war, so we should just emulate them. But we're talking about people who are Black-minded. That's not going to be the case.
Lazy scholar, would you consider the in terms of if you said that if black men were in positions of power, we would relegate women to so-called the same positions as white men. Would you entertain the idea that if we were in these kinds of positions, some women would want to take on the roles of uh, a housewife or a mom or a person in the house who's doing so-called domestic chores and tasks? You know, would you ever consider that some women do want to fall in line and think like that? That's okay for some people. That's yeah, I mean that's okay for some women. Some women embrace that. You know, would you entertain that idea?
Of course, people will do what they want to do, but we have to give them the freedom to do so without a norm that tells them they're less of a person if they don't subscribe to their gender norm.
Do you think that a woman is less of a person if she is a mom or she is just a person who is just taking care of the house, just doing domestic things for the children? Do you think that person is not on the same level of a man?
Well, I mean, it's from my perspective, asking me personally doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily effective. It's would society value her less?
Good,
And depending on the
wonderful.
society, they would either
Yes.
value her less or value her more.
Yes. So now the reason why society, because this is an interesting statement that you make, society feels like so some people in society feel like it is a class down, a step down for a woman to be a so-called domestic partner, a partner who just entertains being a wife, a partner who doesn't go into the so-called corporate industry. Where does these ideas come from? They come from these are feminist ideas created by feminists. They
Of
create this
course.
idea of you, right? So as there are very left-leaning feminists who see that as a punishment, who see that as being relegated to second-class position. You are leaving out a whole perspective of women who don't see it like that. Like Betty Friedan, she was a conservative writer, and she embraced the idea of so-called domesticity. She embraced the idea of motherhood. So I mean, you just take it a leftist perspective of some feminists, but there are other women. There are other women who have just as strong opinions is left out of the conversation. So really, in what you are actually doing is leaving out a whole lot of women out of the equation. So you yourself are relegating your opinions to one perspective and sidelining a whole lot of other women.
I wouldn't go that far only because it would be male dominated policies that would be creating a stronger framework that would push gender norms harder than they are today. I'm
No,
fine
hold on. I mean,
with
there
what we
are women
currently
who
have
advocate for a gender
with
norm.
the intention of better. I'm sorry, so was someone speaking?
Yeah, there are women who advocate for gender norms. In fact, the Pan-African sister Clonoa Hudson Weems, right? Her book Africano-Womanism, she coined the term in 1987. She talks about this. Sherazad Ali talks about these things. So there are numerous black women who are black-minded who advocate for gender norms and
Sure.
believe.
And that's great. That's important. Everyone needs to have the ability to pick whatever preference they want to what they want to promote. But my point is we don't need a policy. We don't need policies or political platforms designated to maintain a status quo related to gender norms. Gender norms should evolve with the current problems and the current solutions of that society. It should not be manipulated so that the people who are still in power can remain in power. And that is
Brother,
what effectively happens.
brother, that's how America works, brother. I
That's
mean,
how every country works.
well, I'm
It's a
saying
problem.
specific.
Wait. But
I'm saying
how do gender norms keep particular people in power?
How do gender norms keep particular people in power?
Yes.
How specifically? Okay, so do you just want an example in a
Yes,
policy
sir.
area? Because our current anti-abortion laws are predicated under a gender norm. It's predicated under reproduction. It's predicated under controlling the female reproductive system.
Yes, but when
But how does
when
that keep
there,
a people from gaining power?
I'm sorry.
But how does that? How does that stop a woman from gaining social and political and economic power?
How does that keep a woman from getting? So if she is unable to control when she's having a child,
You know,
if
everybody
she
can
were to
control.
get
Hold on,
pregnant,
hold
that
on,
would
hold on,
impact her.
wait. Everybody can control when they have a child if they are engaging.
Wow.
Wait, hold on. If they are engaging in consensual sexual intercourse.
Wow. Oh, can women always control when their sex is consensual?
no, but
Unless they're being physically assaulted, yes.
So the answer is no. Then women cannot control because they can't control being physically assaulted. That's
Once
up to
again,
the
I said
assaulted. That's up to
once
the
again,
assailant.
you're moving the goalposts. I said in consensual matters. I didn't say non-consensual. Consensual. I said consensual matters of sexual intercourse. A person has the ability to control that.
But you don't. But you don't create policies around the norm that we're gonna just hope and assume all sex is gonna be consensual. What you do is you create a policy that controls for
Well,
negative
but that's the
externalities.
issue you need to take up with the state, not with black men. We didn't create those policies. So why you beefing with us?
Because black men have to create a coalition that creates a coherent list of policies so that black voters can control better how Democrats respond to black issues as opposed to just
Hold on.
relying on the voting
I'm
base.
not a Democrat.
I'm glad you brought that. I'm glad you brought that up. The Democratic Party is a white supremacist organization, just like the Republican Party. Both organizations. Both organizations are funded by the same special interest groups. This is a reality. Both organizations have a history of anti-black policies, not only domestically but also abroad.
Yes.
This is a reality. So
Yes.
if you're seeking liberation and salvation or empowerment from either political party, I would argue, and we said this on my last show, you might be cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
What we don't
And
have
also,
is a coherent coalition that represents our group interests any longer. We do not have a coherent message along our entire community here in the US to what we want to vote for or what's going to matter for us. And
the
in order for
assumption,
us to have that, we would have to develop a better political acumen. We have to actually have these conversations in a way that's inclusive.
the assumption is that if black men were to get together,
Hold on, Buwana. I don't mean to
look,
cut you off, but once
killing
again,
me.
you didn't answer my question about how does that prevent a person from gaining social, political, and economic power.
Well, you interrupted me when I was explaining how women can't control their reproduction with our back and forth about consent and whatnot. But it was back with that answer.
I said no, because I provided a caveat. I said a woman can control reproduction in consensual encounters, and that's what we're speaking to. Consensual.
If we are living in a world where states are banning contraceptive pills, we are living in a world where states are banning reproductive control options for women based from implants to abortion. Women don't have the ability to control.
Yes, you do. It's called a condom.
Women can't use a diaphragm. That's one that goes in the woman.
Hold up. States aren't banning condoms.
He left. He left.
This is reality. State, like I said, this is an issue, right? But states aren't banning condoms. Everyone, and this is the thing, and I tell people this all the time, and I've told my children this. Part of being a responsible adult is controlling your fertility. And so one of the things that we tend to find from a feminist discourse is that when you're having a conversation, they jump to the extreme, right? What about non-consensual sexual activity? We're not talking about non-consensual. We're talking about consensual acts, right?
I think that you made some very relevant points. I think that the brother is making an assumption when he talks about abortion issues, that black men are not speaking up in terms of women having a right to their own bodies. The assumption is that a black man, if I impregnate a woman, I don't think that she no longer has a right to her body until after the 9 months is over. I
Right.
think that I should have a say so in a rights in terms of what she does to my child
Well, yeah, and
inside of
I
her body.
understand that, and that's an argument that Dr. T. Hassan Johnson makes in his book. Um, what's the name of the book
Yes.
again?
I don't even I don't have it right now.
Anti-black misandry. And one of the arguments he makes is that the woman can decide if she wants to have the child or not. Right? If she wants to carry the child to term, the father doesn't. The woman can get a child up for adoption. The father doesn't have that ability. The woman
Not
can drop the child off at any hospital, fire station, or police station. The man doesn't have the ability to do that. And so the argument he makes is that these laws are inherently inequitable to men because men are always financially and women aren't. Women can actually, that's why they created the Safe Haven Act, because women would actually deleting their babies.
Absolutely. And no one says this one. What about the rights of the child? Who is speaking on behalf of the child? So when this gentleman says women having a right to, you can't defer to the brothers because the brothers may be more conservative than you may think. You can't run to us.
I do know, and this is something Dr. T. Hassan Johnson talks about in his book, and I would agree this is something I've seen working with the Montgomery County Fatherhood Initiative, that the laws are inherently biased against men. Inherently biased against men. Right? And, I mean, you go to court, you got to get an attorney. The state already represents the woman. There's a number of issues, right? And so, you have situations where, let's say you were in Florida, because I think you're in Bahamas, but you're close to Florida, and you have a child with a woman. She takes that child and moves to Montana, right? Well, you can't just pack up and leave because you have to work, right?
Absolutely.
She can still put you on child support, and you have no access to the child whatsoever. So these are some of the issues to where, and you can't just say, oh, we're going to add a coalition. You have to look at, hey, I don't want to advocate for policies that are detrimental to my own economic existence.
These kinds of discussions, besides the sexuality discussion, in terms of female and male relationships, they need to be discussed with females and males. And I think that you are trying to entertain that. But I think that you muddy the waters when the I shouldn't even go there with this one. Well, muddy the waters when certain kinds of conversations come into play.
Well, the thing is, Brother Mufasa he brought up the topic of queer Pan-Africanism. I had never heard of the topic before, and so I thought it would be important to have a show on the topic, right? As I stated before, and I said this on other platforms, that whenever a group of people, any entity, is seeking to falsify African history to promote their own ideology or worldview, that's inherently problematic. Inherently problematic, right? We know we've seen this with Arab colonizers. We've seen this with white nationalists, etc., Arab enslavers. And so we're seeing this from this community as well. And so I think that's, once again, problematic. The other issue is that, as you stated, and I like that you said, even though some people felt that you were making a number of problematic comments, and I would even push back when you said you advocate for discrimination, but that's a conversation we can have offline. But the concern is the fact that, as you stated, and I would agree, these are very extremely left-leaning feminist ideas. And the thing about it is, what we tend to find is, if you aren't being pragmatic, these aren't things that can really be applied. Like when you are raising a young man, you have to raise him in a manner, in my opinion, that is gendered in nature. If not, he's going to be engaging in behaviors that would get him arrested.
Well, I would say this, and I'll say this, and I'll end on this, Brother Lumumba. You said that you never heard of queer Pan-Africanism. The reason for that is that these ideas are being formulated currently, right now. These are going to be our competitors in the future because, like, I don't know if you ever heard of this gentleman called Malafi Asante, Afrocentricity, right?
Yeah,
I'm sure you heard of
a couple of his books.
Absolutely. So right now, there's a sister right now they are trying to work on the theory right now. And I think her name is Feminista Jones. She is trying to get a PhD under Dr. Asante right now, and trying to develop queer theories under Pan-Africanism. So I don't know. Do your research on it, and maybe you can correct me on it later on. But I'm telling you, brother, these ideas are being formulated right now as you speak.
I know. I mean, I've even met people who said they were a Pan-African integrationalist, which is an oxymoron, right? So, and I said this at the top of the show, where you have people who are taking ideas and trying to connect it to Black radical politics
where it doesn't fit,
to then push their idea.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't think there's anything wrong with being queer. As I stated, I don't think people who are queer should be criminalized, discriminated against, dehumanized, whatever. But it's incongruent with the ideology because you're moving the shift from African redemption at home and abroad to now centering concepts of sexuality, gender expression, gender identity, etc.
Yeah, so scholars
movement is about.
Yeah, absolutely. So scholars like you need to have a heads up. You know, y'all have an uphill battle to climb. I'm telling you, man, the future is gonna be wild. But you said that you were saying hi to mom and dad. Does your mother and father listen to these shows, brother?
They know about it. I don't know if they listen.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Well, but respect to you, brother, man. Thank you for the time, brother Lumumba. This has been a very good show, and I think that you're very scholarly and you'd like to teach. So I think that this is your lane, and your voice is really needed out here because the ideas right now is being thrown out here, and there's a whole lot of confusion going on. So we need some clarity from our scholars within our community. So people like yourself, y'all just need to ready yourselves, man. But I'll leave it there, though, brother.
Hold on. Did you get my number? You on Facebook, right?
I have it. No, I have it. Not Facebook, but I have it though. I'll call you. Call you tomorrow. I'll just text you tomorrow just so you can have my number as well.
Okay, no problem. Until next time, family, y'all know what to do. Always bet on Black. We might have a part 2 here. But until next time, y'all know what to do. Peace.